So, welcome to the April 18th regular meeting of the Arbor Planning Commission. For detailed information on meeting procedures, please review the full printed meeting agenda provided. Ms. Kelly, can you call the roll?
Yes, noting that Gibrandel, Abrams, and Mills have indicated that they will be absent for this meeting. Commissioner Salve.
Here.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Here.
Commissioner Dish.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Clark.
Here.
Commissioner Weiss.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next, we'll move to the agenda. So may I have a motion to approve the agenda? Approved by Commissioner White, seconded by Commissioner Dish. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Approved. Motion carries. May I have a motion to approve the previous minutes from April 14th, 2023? Commissioner Lee, Commissioner Dish is seconded. Any discussion on the minutes? No. All those in favor, please say yay.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion carries. So I want to pause here, and I've been requested by Commissioner Clark to take a moment to say some words. So I want to open up the mic to Commissioner Clark.
So I'm going to keep it pretty brief because it's still recent, but I just wanted to acknowledge public service of Jude Walton, who we lost recently, and it's hit a lot of us in the community really hard and is very difficult to say anything about at the moment, but Jude had an enormous impact on different areas of the city, public service, with her work with ICPOC, with her work at Avalon Housing, and I just, again, I'm a bit short on words, it's a bit difficult right now, but I just wanted to acknowledge that and her public service to the community and request that, if you have a moment to show some extra love and appreciation. I know the people that she worked with in all of her functions and capacities are really hurting right now. So that's all.
Thank you for that. Okay. Next up are reports to the Planning Commission. Councilmember Dish, do you have anything to report?
Oh, indeed I do. So 415 West Washington has been the concept plan and the rezoning from PL to PUD received its final approval last night with one, I think, not too burdensome amendment that that at a minimum, whatever comes out of whatever process moves forward from here is net zero ready. And I think that the spirit of that is really to send a signal.
In progress.
Okay. It's to send a signal that we care about it, but that we also trust staff, and we entrust staff with the flexibility to do what they can, because we really want to succeed with this project this time. We've gone on for a long time, and it feels urgent to get that cleaned up and do it in a way that doesn't cost money or doesn't cost money that feels like money, right? General fund money. So I don't remember anything else that you would be interested in, but perhaps I am overlooking something.
Mr. Leonard?
I have two items. First, one additional item on the agenda last evening was the City Council approved a contract to hire Interface Studios to draft a new comprehensive plan for the city. I think Commissioner Dish is probably so excited about it. She's just wrapped up in optimism as opposed to remembering that procedural detail. So roll up your sleeves. We've got a busy 18 to 24 months ahead of you as the Planning Commission. And then another item that on the manager report, I'm going to take a moment to go a little bit more in depth here. I've provided two documents to you as the Planning Commission. One is a letter from the petitioners of 2929 Plymouth, who are here. I'm sure happy to address any questions that you might have, requesting reconsideration of the denial of their project. They have proposed a petition that's been shared with you that, to summarize, they would like the opportunity to continue submittal of their site plan, not the special exception use, with the intention of removing drive-through lanes from their proposed project and adding some additional sustainability features. The motion has been decided. However, under the Planning Commission bylaws, they can request, and it's up to the Planning Commission at your discretion whether or not you are interested in reconsidering that motion. To that end, I've proposed 3 motions for your consideration. It seems like a lot of steps for this, but that's the nature of this process. There are 3 motions that I propose. One would be a motion to amend the agenda this evening in order to add reconsideration of the 2929 Plymouth site plan approval, not the special exception use approval, to your agenda. If you, as the Planning Commission, by majority present, elect to do so, then another motion is presented, a motion that would reconsider that motion as I've summarized. This would, in effect, undo the denial only of the site plan. It would not undo the denial of the special exception use, allowing the petitioner to submit revised plans that would come back to city staff for review and evaluation as that site plan changes to make sure it is consistent with city regulations. And then the last motion would be, if you determine that that is something you're interested in, to postpone consideration of that until the June 21st Planning Commission agenda. As I noted in the memo, this I think it is a reasonable approach. This would shift the criteria to measuring this as a site plan against the UDC, typical to any other site plan. But there are no specific criteria. This is really a procedural item again, at the discretion of the Planning Commission. And that motion could be made for reconsideration by anybody present here, as all of you were on the prevailing side of that motion. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that's sort of some convoluted steps.
I think I understand what the procedures are.
Great.
I don't understand why we would need to do it. Wouldn't it just default back to a by right, and wouldn't they just submit a site plan
It could
in
happen
the future?
They could do that. They could, that decision could stand, and the petitioners could just elect to start the process over again. That would result in them filing a new application, paying a new application fee, starting that process over again. If this was granted reconsideration, they would pick up their existing project midstream, if you will. It would afford them the opportunity to submit a revised plan. Staff would continue to review it under the current application and then re-present it back to the Planning Commission. The ultimate consideration would be the same in either circumstance. It would be measured by the UDC.
So just if you could help me, I'll do a Commissioner Dish statement here, struggling to make this make sense. So this is just for filing and fees. So this would save them. So if we took this up and followed the motion the way that you have outlined it, they wouldn't have to start over.
Correct.
But we would still see a new site plan.
Correct.
We would not be making a decision based on the previously submitted site plan.
Correct.
So it's just a cost differential.
Time would tell. I would anticipate the site plan will look very similar to what was presented before, sans drive-through lanes and some additional sustainability measures that I don't think would impact the site plan layout. But yes, you are correct. In either step, the process internally would look very similar to the petitioner. The process would be more costly in one, and I don't know that time, and timing would probably also be longer in 1, too, because submittal deadlines are once a month, so it might also create a lag before a new site plan could be submitted under our typical review cycles.
And then one more question around, so could you outline what the fee, like, what are the steps? So there's this, well, you know what the steps are, and I won't try to state them.
It would be new citizen participation notices out to all property owners within 500 feet, I think, based on the scale of this project. It would be a pre-submission meeting with city staff. That's a required step. In this case, I wouldn't anticipate that that meeting would be very long because much of that content has been already identified. Then it would go through this typical review process where it's going to be distributed to all city departments based on whatever changes to the layout are happening. I would anticipate that layout's going to be pretty efficient, again, because it's probably removing aspects of the site that add complications rather than being additive. And then and the June 21st date was an estimate of giving us some time frame to go through that and get it back onto agenda and noticed.
Okay. I was wrong. I have one more question. So, because you just said something, which is, it sounds like if we take this action, we remove a public comment period with the petitioner and the community?
You would remove a notification of postcards to all property owners within 500 feet. You would not remove a public hearing. Public hearing
No,
would be...
I'm sorry. Can I?
Yeah.
I know there will be a public hearing at the table.
Yep.
But usually the notice has a petitioner neighborhood engagement.
Not for this scale of project, because of the size of this project, it's only a notification.
Okay, so it wouldn't require that.
Correct.
So-
it would have required that previously with the special exception use permit. Because they wouldn't be considering that, it would strictly be a notification that they have applied for a site plan to the city.
And then, I'm sorry.
Go
Okay,
for it.
thank you. Have you, in your consideration, did you weigh that against the feedback that has come in? Because we've received some 20 communications from community members who have asked us not to reconsider this and to deny the reconsideration. So I just...
Yeah, most of those comments came in after my recommendation, and my recommendation would stand.
Sure.
The conditions would be very similar in either circumstance. We're going to end up with a site plan that is being measured against the Unified Development Code. Again, there's no criteria here that says you as the Planning Commission have to do that. If the Planning Commission chooses not to, that would be the only avenue for the petitioner to continue, or they could elect to just say, nope, had enough. But in either event, we get to the same result. Or, excuse me, the same decision point for the Planning Commission.
I'll let that go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Any other commissioners, officers, or liaisons have anything to report? Nope. Okay, so, good. You're good. At this time, this is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Moving on to public comment about an issue that is not listed as public hearing on this agenda. Since we have not amended the agenda with what was discussed, currently the current thing would not be part of the agenda, the request for Plymouth Road. So any persons wishing to speak on that would be fit in here as well. So we will first call on individuals present to address the commission, then remote participants. To speak during this public hearing remotely, press *9 if listening by phone, or use the raise hand feature if viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will let callers that have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number or by name, if available, for those accessing through the web link. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sound so we may hear you clearly. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak at this time? Seeing no one, is there anyone that would like to address the commission remotely?
We have one hand raised at this time. Pravina Ramaswamy, you have permission to speak and address the commission.
Hello, my name is Pravina Ramasamy. I live in Bromley neighborhood, which backs onto this proposal. I did speak at the last meeting. I asked the commission to not reconsider this proposal. At the last meeting, the majority of the commissioners voted against it, not just for zoning, but they brought up some valid points regarding the future of our city, the future of Plymouth Road, thinking about multi-use spaces rather than a single-story building that has a cookie-cutter bank. I know the community has really spoke. We had over 50 people email, multiple people come to that meeting, and even from the asking not to reconsider, we've had a lot of people in the community speak on this. I know we've had a little bit of time, but in that short time, people have come out to really oppose this, and I think it's because we want to see the space be a space where we can have multiple use. We're not saying no to UMCU, but we're asking UMCU to consider building a space that has multiple spaces with retail, housing, whatnot, and with a bank, not their cookie-cutter brand building. When we say it's not vehicle specific, well, in my eyes it is, even without the teller bank. The current location is very accessible for bus, walking, biking. Well, this proposed space is not. You'd have to go past the Speedway Bank and walk quite a bit. You'd have to cross a busy road without a crosswalk with the bus. So this doesn't make sense to me. It still sounds like people would have to come by car. I'm not seeing the benefit moving it from where it is to this new proposed location, especially without a teller space. I'd really like you to consider, a 15-minute neighborhood. This is your grand opportunity to create something special down Plymouth Road and to really think about this main corridor where people come into our great city. What will it look like? What services can we have? And where can people live? So I ask the commission to please not reconsider the proposal as it stands today as the single-story, cookie-cutter, branded, sloped building, regardless of the environmental pieces they're adding to it. I think from a long-term, 25, 50 years from now, even maybe a few years from now, we would not be using the banks and standalone buildings. We're in a digital world. So let's forward think. Let's think about the innovations and space usage of our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more caller has raised their hand. Alex Lowe, you have permission to speak.
Hi, this is Alex Lowe calling in from Southeast East Ann Arbor. And I just want to say to the from UMCU, when you come back with your new plan, please take the community's feedback into account. You're not Bank of America, you're not Chase plopping down identical buildings all over the country. You're the University of Michigan Credit Union. You're community owned. You are focused on Ann Arbor. Do the Ann Arbor thing here. We know that the site is going to be TC1 at some point. Why don't you get ahead of that? Make it a fully TC1 zone. Show people what TC1 can look like, and show people that UMCU is forward-thinking and not stuck in the 1950s. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Do we have anyone else?
Two other callers have raised their hands. Brandon Dimcheff, you have permission to address the Planning Commission.
Hi, this is Brandon Dimcheff calling in from Larrytown in Ward 4. I also would very much like to see this not be just a simple bank and building that would actually have multi-use and stuff. I worry that we are kind of too late for that at this point. And I think this really emphasizes why we need to consider applying TC1 to these corridors as quickly as possible so that we don't have all of these uses that I think many of us agree are undesirable showing up in areas that we are soon going to disallow this sort of use. So I would like to encourage Planning Commission to really think about trying to get that the rest of the corridors rezoned as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next caller is Christina Watkins. You have permission to address the commission.
Thank you. My name is Christina Watkins. I reside at 2960 Sheffield Court, approximately a quarter mile from the proposed site. I would just like to reiterate what other callers and what other residents' letters have already stated, which is we'd really hope that University of Michigan Credit Union does take into account Ann Arbor Zero Initiative and the fact that we are aiming to create a 15-minute neighborhood. We want multi-use buildings. We do not want single-use, single-story buildings, especially so close to a community pool and school. So we do hope to see a better proposal next time. Thank you.
There are no other hands raised at this time.
Thank you. Next, we move on to public hearings for next business meeting. Ms. Kelly, do we have public hearings scheduled for next business meeting?
Yes, at the Tuesday, May 2nd Planning Commission meeting, which will be at 7 p.m., there will be a public hearing for 999 Maiden Lane, a site plan and rezoning for City Council approval. This project includes a rezoning petition to amend the conditions of the C1AR Campus Business Residential with Conditions zoning designation by removing the condition that the property shall only be developed as the 1140 Broadway planned project site plan, as may be administratively amended, end quote, because 2 of the 3 approved buildings have been constructed, and a site plan application to construct a 180,200 square foot, 7-story residential building on the Building B site of the Beekman Broadway development, replacing the previously approved building with similar dimensions in this location. The zoning district and development site are 6.4 acres, and Building B site is 1.4 acres.
Thank you. All right, moving on. There's no unfinished business unless at this time anyone wants to move for previous agenda items. Other?
Just procedural clarification. So would this be the time to make a motion to reconsider? Just as a
Mr. Leonard?
Yeah, you could make that motion now. It would, it could happen at any point in the agenda prior to commission proposed business. The bylaws would not permit you to take action on any petition during commission proposed business, but this would be an appropriate time if the planning commission desires.
Would it be appropriate for us to at least have a discussion in this period of time? Would you guys be open to having a discussion?
I would propose that you make the motion to add an amendment to the agenda. That would be a forum for the discussion, and then if, based on that discussion, you choose not to, that vote would be the outcome of that.
Okay, then I'll make that motion.
So this would be a motion to add, I guess, item, let's call it 9B, potentially other business, reconsideration of 2929 Plymouth.
Yep.
Yes.
So, moved by Commissioner Lee, seconded by Commissioner White.
What are your questions about reconsideration?
Oh, yeah, so we're in
So open for discussion? Or, okay.
Okay. I just want to better understand, because I hear everybody, and we're obviously getting a lot of public comment about this as well. So to be clear, this is currently zoned office, am I correct?
Correct.
So the kind of use we would have FAR limitations, we wouldn't be constrained by height, but we'd be constrained by FAR if they were to proceed to try and redesign for a TC1 type development.
Correct. Office is FAR regulated, not height regulated.
Okay. So in essence, what we are asking them to do is to say, or at least what I heard the last commenter ask for specifically was, please try to redesign for TC1, which is not currently the zone. Would that be an accurate statement?
So there was a lot of discussion. What I heard from the commission as part of the findings of denial of the special exception use was that the special exception use requires consistency with the city's comprehensive plan. And I think Commissioner Soved sort of actually during that deliberation kicked off this item, and other commissioners, it resonated from my recollection that granting the special exception use for drive-through lanes there was inconsistent with our goals for evolving this as a transit corridor, the use of TC1, other items. There's a lot of other discussion about sustainability, about questions about the site development, but from my lens, I thought that was particularly relevant to the special exception use standards, and the denial of that, of course, came hand in hand then with the site plan that reflected drive-through lanes, that once that special exception use standards are not found, then that site plan was no longer compliant with those standards. So those are the findings I considered. Of course, now the petitioner is requesting not reconsideration of the special exception, the site plan for more time to amend the site plan to be reflective of our current codes, specifically removing drive-throughs, of course, and then also the letter indicates heating the building without natural gas. But alternatively, they could seek TC1 zoning. They could redesign something else under the office district. Too much, or answering your question?
Oh, no, I think that answers my question.
Okay.
Thank you. I want to speak from a practical standpoint, kind of following up on Commissioner Weich's line of at least questioning and inquiring about this particular topic. Let's say that, again, postulating that we don't hear this, or that it gets voted down, essentially, the reconsideration thereof. Would it just be a hindrance, an annoyance for the petitioner, and would they bring it back, basically, just having paid the fees again? So I'm trying to better understand from a practical standpoint, what are our options here? So I just try to understand, again, practically, what decision we're faced with.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I haven't gone to that depth of understanding with the petitioners. If the commission would like to discuss that, you're welcome to. I think practically speaking, again, I think that I feel like the petitioner has heard some of the concerns that were raised by the Planning Commission. I recognize that not all of the concerns that were raised at Planning Commission, nor all of the concerns that have been raised by the comments subsequent to that. In either circumstance, considering this plan devoid of a special exception use is going to be a permitted use in the office district subject to those regulations. If it is not reconsidered and the petitioner chooses to file a new site plan, that same condition will apply. So from my lens, the petitioner is offering some sustainability provisions that are above and beyond, for example, what the minimum requirements are of the code. So I haven't gone to the depth to say that those would go away if we started over or from that perspective, but that's my premise, that I think it's reasonable to continue evaluation of this site plan for some of those reasons.
Gotcha. So this might be an opportunity to try and, I don't want to use the word leverage, but to say that we better understand their commitments to sustainability.
I think that's what they're saying in their letter, that they're interested in presenting more of that commitment as part of a project.
Is it appropriate for me to ask the petitioner to give me an idea of, is that an okay question to ask at this time? I just want to hear from them, essentially, what they're thinking.
Yeah. I'm fine with that this time, to open it up.
Gotcha. So what are you guys thinking from, like, again, practically, if this doesn't get reconsidered, you guys just going to submit another site plan saying, hey, I'm going by right. So it's just going to cost me more time and money, but this is going to happen. Or, like, I guess I'm trying to better understand.
Absolutely, great question.
Sure.
Thank you for that. So yes, we are still interested in building on the property that we own. So we probably would submit a new application if that's the direction we need to go. We had a long conversation with your staff as well as our team for options, and just to save everyone in time, we just felt like it might be more appropriate to go this route. We did hear the commissioners. We are listening to the members of the community, which is why we have elected to remove the special use that we were attempted for, even though we felt it was part of our business model and would assist some of our members with either handicaps or other needs that they have for wanting to choose a drive-through. In addition to evaluating other sustainability options, in addition to the one that was pointed out as far as heating it without natural gas. So, does that answer?
It does. It seems like you guys would bring forth, if this was not up for reconsideration, you guys would just simply bring it back under another application. Is that accurate summation?
Yes.
That would be accurate, yes.
Okay, gotcha. And I guess I would like to just kind of hone in on one of the things you had said here, which was we've listened to the community, and one of the things that they just spoke about, I think, 5-10 minutes ago, was a 15-minute neighborhood. Additional benefits, again, from access, amenitization of neighborhood, and connectivity and porosity. So just, I want to better understand, other than the drive-throughs, whether those kinds of comments, what you would say to the commenter that just spoke, Alex? And
Yep. One of the things we had discussed, just to give an example, and of course, we haven't gone through, actually, we're looking at, we have regular design meetings. So as a group, we haven't completely fully talked about this and designed it, but what would it look like if we added, any sort of bench or kind of park area on our space somewhere? We did that at our Carpenter Road location. We added, because they were trying to do more walkability and they have bus stops, a lot of people commute via non-vehicular means. And so we added benches and kind of a nice resting place for people that they could just kind of sit and watch. If you're a people watcher, or I just want to rest and wait for the bus, it's a little bit further away. So we were looking at discussing some of those options as well.
Gotcha, understood. And please remind me, what is the current use of the site and the utilization of that office building right now as it stands, as you guys are the owners?
As far as like square footage, is that what you're asking?
Oh, yeah, what's the building being used for right now? Is it occupied, is it?
Yeah, the Carpenter Road,
Yeah.
or?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, the 2929. Yeah,
It is currently empty space. It is empty.
It's vacant?
It
There's
is
a parking
vacant.
lot, okay.
Yep.
Gotcha, understood.
Yeah.
Just wanted to, again, better understand kind of what decision we're faced with, whether all we're doing is delaying, I guess, what you guys will bring forth again for by right consideration. I think I set up this in the last meeting, or when we revised this, reviewed this the first time, from stormwater retention, bringing that up to standards, I saw as a public benefit. Electrification would be a public benefit, and I think consideration of even maybe a triangular dedication of a cut-through path with some greeneries that would allow for better connectivity to the bus stop would be something that I would find more comfort in doing. But I think it was just helpful for me to hear, because I haven't made up my mind yet about the way this is going. I think I'm looking at the rest of the commissioners. I think I have an understanding of where they're likely going to go with this, but I wanted to at least give due process and listen to all of the parties involved. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'll yield my time because I think I have an understanding of what's happening. So I'll defer to my other commissioners. Thanks.
Commissioner White?
Just a clarification of the site plan. Would the new site plan also include the division of the property? And does that stop at the planning table, or does that go to council? I was trying to look it up in the UDC, but I couldn't find it.
It would be a condition of site plan approval, so effectively, the planning commission would be adding that condition Land divisions actually can be approved administratively. In this case, it would be a condition of any site plan approval based on the arrangement of the site.
And what's the collision of that and the conflicting land use buffer?
Time will tell.
Isn't that going to lock that site?
Time will tell. The Ordinance Revisions Committee will be looking at conflicting land use buffer language, but currently, if that lot is split and residential uses would become present next to it, then the conflicting land use buffer would, in that case, apply both to the north and to the west.
So it would make the parcel very challenging to develop on. So it would like almost force it into a PUD.
Probably not as much as club impacts R4C development, but it would remove some buildable area.
Okay. So this is a problem of the UDC and where we sit, not necessarily an issue with the petitioner. So they bought the land is zoned how we've zoned it. They're bringing a site plan that matches the zoning, and we are realizing, oh, that's not really what we would love to have there, but we haven't done the work to say what we want there. So we're in this, I think someone adequately called it an inflection point, where we are running into the age of our UDC, or the comprehensive land use, which informs the UDC, however we mince those terms. And that's really what we're kind of struggling with, because otherwise this is just by right. So all we're really deciding is, do we want them to start over or not? And just personally, if that's all we're deciding, I don't think it makes sense to force them to start over, personally. But I think this gets to a larger issue, which is the neighbors, in a very agreeable way, don't want a single-story, single-use development here. They have communicated that to us. Do we have a tool to remedy that? And how would that intersect with this petition?
So I think the way that you summarized it, I agree with. I think that that's a great overview to the question. That's a question that I just want to be honest, I'm wrestling with, and we are wrestling with. There's a lot of aspects to that. Obviously, we have rezoned some corridors to TC1. We have not yet had development proposals on those. Subsequent to that, City Council has specifically directed us to make some modifications to the TC1. That is, we've had some conversations at this table about making those changes and modifications so that as that district expands to other areas of the city, we have addressed those concerns. There was some concerns at the rezoning of the stadium corridor. There was concern at the council level about whether to rezone that, but for these directives that the City Council has now directed the Planning Commission to look at. You're seeing the first of those this evening. There's another piece of that, which is the right-of-way. So we are attempting to, from my perspective, we need to address those changes so that when the TC1 district starts getting added to other corridors in the city, it is done with the confidence of both this body and the City Council that it is an appropriate district for those areas. And so I think that the frustrations from the neighbors in this case is that that work has not gone fast enough to be at a position where that's done today.
Yeah. Okay. I'll let.
Commissioner Dish?
Yeah. So, but I really liked your question, Commissioner Weich, which was, do we have any tools to get something closer to what we wish it would be or not?
So we have an obligation under this case to consider this site plan. Well, we don't have any obligation to consider this site plan, but if a new site plan comes in, we have an obligation to measure that against the UDC. So I would say, in short, we don't have tools. We cannot force this applicant to apply to rezone their property to TC1. The city council or the planning commission could elect to initiate a rezoning of that corridor or this property. But again, the messaging that I have heard from our policymakers and the direction that you have received as the planning commission is that we want to see changes to that district before it goes forward. And I am emphasizing that that came out of some uncertainty at the application of that district to the Stadium Road corridor. And so replicating that uncertainty before those questions are answered, from my lens, doesn't seem like the appropriate path. I understand that that doesn't satisfy all urgency, and there might be differing perspectives on that for sure, but that's how I am approaching it as the planning manager.
So I guess what I would say is that I appreciate that the petitioner is listening to the sustainability, to the energy efficiency concerns that were raised in our last discussion. And at base, I think the objection to this project, beyond the drive-through, which was a significant element that was, because it is trip intensive, I believe was the term we used last time, it's very much at odds with the desire for a more walkable city. But the other feature of a more walkable city, or one other key feature of a more walkable city, is dense, efficient use of land. And this is not that. And so if you really wanted to hear us, in my fantasy, what would come back is a two-story project, because you want to have a bank and you want to have a conference center and you want to have a place where you can counsel people on how to get loans. These were things that, if I'm remembering, you talked about, which I thought were laudable. Can't that be done in 2 stories and with a less of a footprint and with less, with not so large of a setback? That's one of our concerns, is that the more things that we get on this corridor that have large setbacks, the harder it is for it to be a place where people genuinely want to walk, because it just feels weird. Even if you're not walking in front of a huge parking lot, it feels weird to walk in front of a huge field of grass. So that, and obviously all I can say is that that's what I think is laying at the base of this, is this desire for denser, more efficient use of land. And that desire makes sense to me because we are a very built-out city, and we are a very expensive city. And we don't want to be an expensive city, because an expensive city is an exclusionary city. And so you're asking to use a lot of land to do not very much in the neighbor's eyes, right? It's one thing that they see a lot of on the corridor. So, I take your point, Commissioner Weich, that it seems the words that are coming to mind are so judgmental that I don't want to use any of them, but that pointless is good. Okay. It seems pointless merely to refuse to reconsider so that this might take a month or 6 weeks longer and the petitioner has to pay another fee. Well, that doesn't seem very nice. But on the other hand, I don't know that I want to make it easier to build something that isn't a dense and efficient use of land in a place that is very built up, and where the building up, where that condition that we are all working under is really having significant consequences for people's principles. So I am torn.
More discussion on the motion about amending agenda. Commissioner White.
So I just want to come back to the tool question that I think I asked, or maybe Commissioner Dish took it over, so don't know who to give credit to. So I think the challenge, I agree that the motion to reconsider probably makes sense because it doesn't make a lot of sense to just force it back into the piece. The question that I was asking about the tool is not exclusive to making a zoning change, right? Because we could propose a zoning change and then go through the process of a zoning change, but that might be spot zoning, so I don't know what the rules are around that type of apparatus. But do we have incentives at this point? Are there fees that could be waived? Are there things that could be expedited that incentivize the petitioner to realize what we are hearing from the community and what some sense at the table is indicating? So it's office, and residential is permitted in office. I couldn't find out, other than the FAR, how much residential they could do. Are there things where, if the petitioner were agreeable to consider, we have inside the city to make their development and the work that they're doing easier for them, and it helps the neighborhood? Because I think what I'm just trying to assess is there a win-win here? The petitioner already has the property, it's already zoned. They have every right to build what we have told them is permitted there, period. And are there tools where we can say, if you build this, this might go better? There are things that are coming in the development that if you were to consider, we could move around. I don't know. That's what I meant by a tool, not just a UDC change, because I understand we can't affect a UDC change in the midst of this, because that would probably open us up to some legal challenges.
In short, I'm not aware of that tool, but I would say that the petitioner is here asking for an accommodation. They've already provided some beyond minimum standard modifications. I feel I can't, I wish I could be confident and promise you that I could guarantee you, but some outcome here in either circumstance. But I do think that by continuing our relationship with this petitioner on this site plan, I just feel that it is a better position for us as the community to sit with them at the table. Maybe we could explore reducing the footprint overall of the site potentially in the absence of drive-throughs to still accomplish their goals and sort of try to make the development as compact as it might possibly be. But again, at the end of the day, I want to be clear, we have to respond to the application that's in front of us. But I think that the best tool at this case is saying, thank you for listening. We have a couple other things that we'd like to explore with you. Another way that we could do that, frankly, is we could, instead of postponing this to a date certain, is you could table this to make sure that we have the space with the project team to come to work towards the best project we can. I want to be clear. I wouldn't intend for that to mean it's going to be a year, but rather than being constrained by that specific date, if there are some modifications that we're exploring with them that staff thinks is receptive to some of the concerns that either the neighbors have raised or the Planning Commission has raised, that might give us a little bit more space to address those. But at the end of the day, whether it's, I want to be clear, if the Planning Commission does do this, and at some point staff says, hey, it would be great if you eliminated this parking space, or it'd be great if you considered this additional non-motorized. If those aren't required standards, ultimately they would have the ability to say, thanks for your advice, but no thanks.
Commissioner Lee?
For, again, procedural basis, how many votes does it take to, would all 6 have to basically?
No, in the
vote?
case of this, it would be a majority of those present. So if you, based on the motion here, it would require 4 affirmative votes to amend the agenda, and then it would require 4 affirmative votes for reconsideration, and the corresponding tabling.
Gotcha, understood. And I do want to clarify kind of, again, my position on this. The reason I asked what's the current utilization of the site is that it's vacant. It is a vacant office building. To me, what's important is the health, safety, and general welfare of the community, right? I want this to be a healthier community. I want this to be a safer community. And to me, the concern I have is there being a bus stop right now. So let's say that we, make this slightly more, for lack of a better word, obnoxious for the petitioner, right? We push it back. We tell them, hey, let's redesign to a mixed-use development. It requires a different capital stack, requires a different vision, a vision that seems to be more aligned with, frankly, the comprehensive plan. So that's what we're trying to weigh right now, right? And so I'm of the mindset that it takes a lot more time. So how long does it sit before, I'd rather see kind of, a cleaned up, productive, eyes on the street, Jane Jacobs kind of concept where we have a safer, healthier community. So, obviously the drive-through lanes were not in concert with that, but keeping this property vacant for a longer period of time also, again, it's trade-offs. And so I'm looking at it from that standpoint of what is the decision we can make tonight as a body that is in concert with the greatest amount of improvement in safety, greatest improvement in health, and without knowing all of the variables, right? Obviously this is a lot of different considerations. So I just wanted to say from that timeline standpoint of, I'm not going to say it's inevitable this is happening, but the petitioners indicated they'll bring it again. And so that's where my consideration comes in. It sits vacant. There's no eyes on the street, and it sits for another several years, and that's not necessarily something I want either. So that is kind of, again, from my standpoint. And so I wanted to have clarification, so it requires a majority. Not necessarily the 6 that it requires to advance something else. So, but I would like to also hear from actually Commissioner Sauvé, specifically only because you did make fairly compelling arguments last time about, this isn't a spurious denial. We have had specifically TC1 allocated. It isn't TC1, but I just need to refresh myself where that's codified and where that community goal. So I'd love to hear from you kind of on your thoughts regarding this and what are the rationales that's just going through your mind currently? If you wouldn't mind.
No, I'm happy to.
Sure.
The grounds are special exception use. We have the discretion and liberty to deny based on that. And part of the special exception use standards are applying it as it relates to our comprehensive plan documents. And I didn't believe that it met several of the goals of our comprehensive planning documents. And so with that, the special exception use and the site plan together got denied. In the context of today, I believe that the tool that we have is time in actually a positive. We are discussing TC1. The petitioner's here to hear some of the progress and the goals of TC1. I understand that we're talking about conflicting land use buffers in the immediate future, which could have an impact on this site as well and adjacent. And so both of those discussions are immediate that the petitioner can take into consideration where those discussions lay to reapply to an updated site plan. Simultaneously, being able to start again allows them not to kind of like Band-Aid and tuck point some of these issues, but a reconsideration from the full traffic standpoint. There were concerns about, fire truck point access, bus access, and things like that. So I think that there are eminent discussions around other policy immediately, like in the coming weeks, that may not be adopted immediately, but depending on the duration of reconsideration by the petitioner, it could actually influence the design more than deleting the parking or deleting the drive-through lanes. And so I think it's things like that that really make me kind of consider like what would happen in time, it's really hard for me to believe that based on the goals kind of stated and even what the petitioner wants to incorporate, that this would be ready for reconsideration in 2 months. So at that point, how many times are we noticing this versus the opportunity to reset and do a full notice by postcard again? So those are the things that I'm weighing in terms of notification, if not to a date certain. How do we re-engage the community if this takes longer than the date that we set tonight? And what are the current things on our working plan that the petitioner can now engage in? Because I think a lot of the discussion from last time was about, haven't you been paying attention? These are very consistent discussions about drive-throughs. This cannot be the first time that you're hearing about this if you've been working on this project within the city for quite a while. So I think that these conversations are public and can be considered. So that's my take.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that feedback. And then also, again, as I respect your opinion, so I wanted to hear from you again. Mr. Leonard, you had proposed a separate kind of modification of the motion, in one which we may be able to table. Can you refresh us on that?
Well, to be clear, in either circumstance, it would require reconsideration of the motion. In my memorandum to the Planning Commission, I proposed a postponement to a date certain. I think that was from largely a perspective of the site would not change significantly other than the removal of the drive-through and adding the condition of electrification. My hypothesis is just instead of postponing it to a date certain, if the Planning Commission chooses to reconsider tabling action, that means there wouldn't be a date certain. I want to be clear, in either case of either a postponement or a tabling, because of the nature of this process, the public hearing will be re-noticed. That's distinct if the item would have been postponed at the previous public hearing, because that there could be individuals who were noticed of that meeting and are not here to understand, even if the Planning Commission chose that. So that will be re-noticed. To Commissioner Sauvé's point, if it is not reconsidered, additional notification will go out based on our citizen participation requirements. But if more time, if we weren't under a deadline of the 21st, it might afford staff and the petitioner more opportunity to come up with some other creative solutions.
Thank you.
But I want to be clear to your question. They are likely going to be more modest than, for the reasons that you are, I think, articulated, that drastically reconceiving this building and its financing model would be pretty different. So I'm thinking about more of just scale, its arrangement on the site, its relationship to the other sites. So I just want to be honest about expectations and where I would see movement.
Sure, I understand. And again, the alternative is we don't move to reconsider, and they will likely bring back another site plan. So I will take that into consideration. For that, I will move to reconsider the motion on a tabling basis.
We're still in discussion of a movement.
Psych. Okay,
Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah, we're deep into this.
Okay, yeah, cool.
I'll offer one more kind of question to this. Sorry, I'm stretching this conversation about the motion of the agenda item, because if we don't talk about it now and it fails, we don't get to talk about it the next step. So let's just get all of it out now. I guess my question is, from the letter from the petitioner, there's no guarantees of electrification. It's just an accommodation that they've said that they would do, but when it comes back, there's no guarantee that we have to hold them to it. It still would come back as a by right.
They could present a plan that doesn't include that. In other site plans, though, I will note that when petitioners are responding to those community goals, when they are offered voluntarily, and they are memorialized then as in a development agreement. So they do become obligations of the site, but you're right. This plan could come back and say, yeah, we looked at it. No, we don't want to do that.
And that's in both cases, the same scenario of it. Okay. I just want to open up that up to the table. Any further discussion?
Not on this motion.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt?
Just want to clarify one thing that you just said. So you memorialize it in a development agreement. So even though the city does not require electrification right now, if it's in the development agreement, the petitioner is required to do it once they've passed planning commission?
Correct.
Okay.
I think we're ready for a vote. We are voting on the motion to amend the agenda to add reconsideration of 2929 Plymouth Road site plan approval as item 10A, other business.
Which means, Commissioner Lee, you're going to have to stick around.
Well, maybe.
Maybe. Sorry. Maybe. I was thinking I picked the wrong spot. It'll work.
On the motion to amend the agenda to include 2929 Plymouth, Commissioner Lee.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
No.
Commissioner Sauvé.
No.
Commissioner Dish.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
No.
Commissioner Weiss.
No.
This motion fails.
Okay. So now we are moving on to regular business, which includes TC1.
Yes, I'd like to say I'm recusing myself from the discussion of TC1 on the basis that my employer owns property in TC1.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. And so this, I hand it over to staff for report to start.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to City Planner Alexis DeLeo for an overview of the proposed amendments. Oh, you're fine. No, we're fine. Actually, we're going to give Commissioner Lee the opportunity to recuse himself from the room. Commissioner Lee, based on that action, I think you should go home.
Thank you.
So before Alexis kicks off the presentation, I just want to be clear, regardless of the outcome this evening, I know that this motion will fail. You have a quorum to conduct business. However, you don't have, with Commissioner Lee's recusal, we don't have 6 affirmative votes to pass action. This happens from time to time. I want to be clear, it will be reported onto the City Council as a recommendation of denial from the Planning Commission, but they will also be shared with the record that would show whatever the outcome of that vote is. My rationale is that this, per our last discussion, there's a lot of interest, I think, in getting this district in the best shape as possible. And so my intention is to continue moving this regardless of the challenges that we've had with attendance tonight. Again, I don't know what the outcome of your vote is, but because there are not 6 members present, it will clearly not be for approval.
No, you go ahead.
Is that a rule, like a law that says because we don't?
It's in your bylaws.
Okay, so then since it's in our bylaws, then could I make a motion for us to postpone this to the next meeting so that we could vote on this? And the only reason why I am asking that question is council, it's my understanding that council looks to planning to understand where things are moving as it comes to their table. They have their own ability to vote at their table, but they also want to understand how planning is weighing in on some of these pieces. And I think that's sort of evident in our last meeting where staff said denial And then the table had a very long conversation, and it passed 6-2. So that information is important when it goes to the council table. And we're going to lose our ability to communicate through our vote to the council table. And I'm just concerned about, like, why are we doing that?
Sure. To your first question, of course, the Planning Commission always has the option to approve something, deny something, or postpone action on it. So that is definitely an option. In this case, I concur. The report of hypothetically, if all 5 commissioners here present voted in favor of the proposed amendments, that transmission would be a denial because it doesn't meet 6 votes, but it would also reflect that all members present were supportive of that action. I will say that there have been circumstances in the past where the city council, I think, has seen the totality of that record and understood the circumstances of a case like this, frankly, where based on some peculiar scenarios of our attendance, we were unable to achieve the required number of votes. I can't speak for the city council how they would project that, what the vote would have been if the presence were there. So in short, it's a possibility. For the sake of a lot of work ahead, I have of the mind, and I would advise the Planning Commission to take your votes here and let's progress it to City Council. I think that City Council is hungry for these changes based on a lot of the conversation of the previous item and other conversations that they're hearing. So the nuances of that, I think, the downside of that singular voice of Planning Commission, that's unfortunate that if otherwise there would have been more members here, it would have been a different outcome. I think the totality of that record will not be lost on council, and it'll afford us the ability to move that forward and get on to the next work.
Would we have the capacity to officially amend the motion? Like if we made amendments to the motion and then voted on those amendments prior, that would be official record?
This evening?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we could pass on an amended motion that failed.
Correct.
But at least the discussion, we could amend it and then send that to council to understand maybe some changes to it.
The bylaws stipulate that 6 votes are required for items of advice items to the city council.
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever actions you take at this table can happen, but 6 affirmative votes that signifies a recommendation of approval or denial to.
Yep. So it's 4 votes still to amend it. And 3 now. 3 from because now we're down to 5. 3 votes to officially amend it. And then we have a formal record of any amended if there's discussion and decision to do that.
Correct.
And then that proceeds, but it will always, in this case, proceed as a fail.
Yep.
Okay. Does that?
That is helpful. Thank you.
But I want to be clear, postponement is an option.
No.
I don't know that it's necessary.
Yep.
Yes, now that we can vote.
Commissioner Ditch?
I just want to acknowledge that I think there is some complexity here, because I do think that when council kind of returned TC1 to the Planning Commission, it is with some requests that I do not think the Planning Commission is necessarily fully in sympathy with council on. So the complex situation tonight is if it fails because it has to, but also because you don't like some of the changes that are being made. And so that may be the harder message to communicate. But since there is the ability to amend, the council members, I'm fairly confident, have the ability to read. So they can read our minutes, and I can report the sense of the discussion, and I will do so fairly regardless of where I stand on the things that are discussed here. But it is true that we are missing some voices who raise crucial refinements often to the things that we're looking at. It's just, what I'm hearing from my colleagues on council is a tremendous impatience, which I have some frustration about, because it's April 18th. I mean, we were told when we sent this back that we wouldn't get everything back until the summer. It's not summer, it's November out there. So, you know, I am worried that a postponement is going to start a little brush fire. So I would kind of rather that you trusted that the minutes, any amendments you make, and my report of the sense of the discussion would not lose your nuance if we feel we can proceed without the expertise that we're missing, because we are missing some considerable expertise. So,
Alexis, take it away.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. All right, thank you. Oh, I'm not at the beginning. Okay. We are at the beginning. All right. Thank you. Before you this evening are some amendments to the Unified Development Code.
Can you get your mic closer? Sorry, it's
Even
just hard
closer?
to hear down here.
Even closer?
Yes.
All right, got it. All right. Good evening. Tonight before you is amendments to the UDC related to the TC1 Transit Corridor District. These amendments are to allow vehicular uses, These amendments are to allow vehicular sales and rental, specifically it's automobile, motorcycle, recreation vehicle, equipment sales and rental is what is in the primary use table, to allow this in the TC1 district. Second, to allow automobile, truck, and construction equipment repair as a primary use in the TC1 district, and to redesign the transit corridor development use-specific standards table to clarify the building topologies and application of the standards. Let me start with a tiny bit of background, not super in-depth, but the TC1 district was created in 2021. It is our newest zoning district added to the UDC. It's supposed to be located along existing transit corridors to realize mixed-use developments and mixed-use corridors, and to support and sustain transit service, which means increasing housing choice, housing affordability, sustainability, and decreasing resource and energy needs from those developments. The reason we are bringing forth these amendments is City Council passed a resolution in December asking to the Planning Commission to evaluate and recommend some amendments, specifically to incorporate some limited automobile-related uses, but there was a note to exclude drive-throughs and gas stations. And council asked us to address constraints of the existing narrow rights-of-way, primarily thinking of the West Stadium Boulevard area, but any place where TC1 is or may be applied. Tonight, we are only addressing the first element, incorporating limited automobile-related uses. We will have to come back to you in the future to discuss addressing those constraints of the existing narrow rights-of-way. The TC1 district is a version of form-based code similar to our downtown zoning districts D1 and D2, but the TC1 district is heavy into and has a lot of form-based code elements. As a reminder to level the discussion, form-based codes are a way to regulate development that controls building form first and building use second. Some people also describe it as a means of regulating land development to achieve a specific urban form, or land development regulation using physical form rather than separation of land uses as the organizing principle. Our TC1 district has some minimums, some maximums, some must-have, some of those form standards. Highlights are our minimums include 2-story buildings. The first floor height has to be 15 feet, and that allows for a variety of uses long-term into the future, regardless of what the initial use is. 60% first floor transparency. Must-haves include functional entrances facing the street. The building spans 70% of the lot frontage at least.
We require smaller block designs for larger sites. We have a 15-foot maximum setback. A footnote is that is for mixed-use buildings, not for residential apartment buildings. Those can go 20 feet. We have a maximum of one curb cut. We maximize the vehicular use area at either 100 or 125% of the building footprint, so that the dominant use of the site by surface area is not parking. We have maximum heights, and we have a maximum diagonal dimension for that building. The limited automobile-related uses we are suggesting to incorporate are vehicle sales, summarized without the full titles, but vehicle sales and rental and vehicle repair. We recommend and we recommend taking them together. We feel that there are so many of interrelatedness to these sales and rental. Sometimes businesses could repair and then rent out what they sell, or vice versa. Sometimes repair can be attached to retail, parts and such. They work very well together. And we are recommending approval relying on our form-based codes for newly established businesses, vehicle repair or sales and rental businesses. The TC1 standards are triggered by new development, and if someone is any business, whether it be these limited automobile-related or any other business of any sort, if they are willing to build to our form, then we can confidently welcome them into the district. In that sense, selling brand-new automobiles is no different than selling T-shirts or bananas. It's going to be in the same building typology. And then for existing businesses, our rezoning of some of these corridors, both the West Stadium Maple corridor and the State and Eisenhower corridor, are pretty much built out. There are but one or two vacant sites on each of those, and that means there are some of these existing automobile-related uses. We have made them non-conforming. Our code takes a very hard line. You either have a conforming site and you can make all of your improvements, whether big or small, incrementally, or you're a non-conforming use and you need to be phased out. We can discuss regulating non-conforming uses in a different topic, but for now, there is really no middle area, and making these existing businesses back to conforming does open up, again, the potential for incremental improvements towards compliance. So they might be in one-story buildings now, but this would slightly incentivize bringing those, not punishing the uses, and then focusing on getting the forms to where we'd like. Our batch of amendments also includes some table redesign of table 516-2. Of course, I thought this was the best table ever. It provides the regulations into two classifications for lot widths up to 250 feet and then lot widths over. There were 3 building typologies: mixed-use buildings, townhouse apartment buildings, and all buildings, broken up into 5 categories with horizontal lines and columns and colors. And it's not as intuitive as one hopes. So we proposed both a redesign and some amendments that seem to come naturally out of these, the table redesign. It just has sort of 3 categories: talks about sites, how to lay out your site, talks about building regulations, and then just a little bit about some specific buildings. The specific buildings are townhouses and apartment buildings, or not townhouse and apartment buildings. And we've added some numbers and headings for easier discussion, talking on the phone, looking at it, commonality. And we've also made an attempt to really reduce the repetition between the two, or between all of the standards. I'll go through the substantive table amendments. And I do believe that this provides a little bit better than the staff report may have. they don't conflict, but I think this visually goes a little bit better. Nevertheless, we've added a heading called Development Arrangement, and it comes from the previous standard that says originally, when the site is more than 62,500 square feet, the site must be designed as blocks, 250 feet on each side, or as near as practical given the site shape, with sidewalks, plazas, or drives separating the blocks. And we've proposed an amendment that when the site is that size, it must be designed as 2 or more blocks, with sidewalks, plazas, drives, or private streets, or proposed public rights-of-way separating the blocks. We have removed the 250-foot mark, but hold on, it comes back. For building frontage, there were 3 standards. One was minimum frontage equals to lot width less 30 feet or 45 when adjacent to residential zoning, or a minimum of 75 feet, or, 70% or 75%. Proposing a change, and the substantive part is that there's no 75 requirement, it's 70%. And the minimum frontage is 70% of the lot width, but we do allow that as long as there's 30 feet between the building and side lot line normally, or 45 feet. Those 30 and 45-foot numbers were chosen because 30 feet is the side setback. 30 feet is when provides you with a conflicting land use buffer if necessary, and the width of a driveway. 45 feet provides the side setback required when you're adjacent to residential. So you can still have a driveway and maximize the building frontage. And it was a point of confusion that if you were to divide your site as blocks like we asked, how then do you measure the frontage? Is it based on the original dimension of the site, or is it based on the blocks and the additional separation you've inserted into your design? So we've clarified it with, if the site is divided into smaller blocks as required, the minimum frontage applies to each block. For transparency, we have proposed to actually strike the language that was written and to refer to Section 517.6C2, which I've repeated below here. That section is for the buildings in the D1 and D2 district. And so rather than repeat the language in 2 different spots in the code, but this language is a little bit clearer, provides a little more detail, a little more tried and true. We've been using it in the downtown, and has a little more specificity about exactly how do you measure and achieve that transparency. For building dimensions, we've combined that 250-foot block length that we had mentioned previously and the maximum diagonal. So the building width parallel to the street may not exceed 250 feet, pulling that standard from previously, because that's what we sort of meant. The 250 feet standard comes from downtown. The width of the private property on our smallest downtown blocks, which we are using for a proxy of very comfortable pedestrian scale blocks, is 250 feet. But if you add the width of the sidewalks adjacent to those blocks, depends on how you define block. Do you define it property line to property line? Do you define it from one, including both sidewalks? Do you go to center line of the road to the center line of the next road? Here, so it doesn't matter, we've removed that confusion about how do you measure a block, and switched it to the maximum width of the building parallel to the street is 250 feet. And then please add your sidewalks and plazas and so forth. And the maximum diagonal dimension remains at 360 feet. That's the diagonal dimension if you provide a building that's 250 square. And finally, clarifying where we are prohibiting residential uses, and and that not all intersections are the same. Previously, it said mixed-use buildings couldn't have the portion of the first story within 100 feet of an intersection, or had to be occupied by non-residential uses. For townhouse apartment buildings, not permitted within 100 feet of an intersection of public rights-of-way. This was all-encompassing. This included then the intersection of State and Eisenhower, but it also included the intersection of Collingwood and Abbott, which are, vastly different scales. It would be appropriate to have residential within 100 feet of say, Collingwood and Abbott. So this has been switched to residential uses are not permitted on the first floor of a mixed-use building within 100 feet of a signalized intersection, and similar to the townhouse and apartment buildings. And I think, yes. So this concludes our substantive amendments. It's a lot. I'm happy to break down or go over any additional either related to auto uses or the substantive or redesign of the table elements. But planning staff are recommending approval of this. As we all understand, the vote tonight may at best would be 5-0. It can be characterized as the vote is not so much denied. I think that City Council will understand the vote is not so much denied as it did not reach 6 votes. Now, if the vote is 0-5, that would be different. But if it's 5-0, I believe our City Council has experience in that it doesn't mean it has been denied, but it means that it has just failed to reach the minimum threshold. Any questions? Oh, public hearing, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ms. DeLeo. So now we're going to move on to public hearing. This is an opportunity for persons to speak up to 3 minutes about the proposed UDC amendments to the TC1 zoning district. We will first call individuals present to address the commission, then remote participants. To speak during the public hearing remotely, press *9 if listening by phone and use the raise hand feature if viewing via the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number or by name if available for those accessing through the web link. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds. We may hear you clearly. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. First, we'll go to anyone present. I do not see anyone. We have a lot more chairs in here, though, as you just start to notice. We are packed with chairs again. Okay. Is there anyone that would like to address the commission remotely? Ms. Kelly.
There are currently 3 hands raised. Our first caller is Adam Yaskevich. You have permission to address the commission.
Hi, this is Adam Jaskevich, 1430 Las Vegas Drive. I live in the Dickin neighborhood adjacent to the West Stadium TC1 corridor. While I'm not a big fan of changing the allowed uses for TC1 before we even see any new development coming out of it, I've been following these discussions. I understand why you're considering making this change. I also understand that this will be, I guess, technically denied tonight, which I guess is the best kind of denied. What I have a hard time understanding is how most of these kinds of businesses are going to be compatible with a transit corridor heavy with pedestrian, bus, and bike traffic. I think it will be difficult for developers to thread that needle. We have a climate crisis and we have a traffic violence crisis, and therefore we have committed to cutting vehicle miles traveled in half. Adding more car-centric uses is not compatible with that goal. However, looking at the ask from council and from watching prior discussions on this topic, it sounded to me like the intent was that these be added as a special exception use, and that is what I was expecting to see tonight. This would make the use consistent with our D1 and D2 zones, which I believe was a point made in prior discussions of this change. In fact, that is mentioned in the second whereas clause from council. Whereas some automobile-related commercial uses, i.e. car rental and repair, located in close proximity to housing, are supportive of the goals of TC1 zoning district, but currently aren't permitted by special exception use. If you really must allow these uses in TC1, please consider making them a special exception use rather than a primary use, so that you can retain at least some discretion in whether or not to allow these uses. Thank you.
Our next caller is Adam Goodman. You have permission to address the commission.
Hi there, Adam Goodman, 400 Virginia Avenue. So I've spoken to you several times on TC1 before, especially on the West Stadium corridor near where I live. And one of my principal arguments of why we needed to move TC1 forward as quickly as we did is the idea that I think the community really does not want to see a lot of net new auto-oriented uses along this corridor. In fact, in talking to you before, I specifically noted a site on West Stadium advertising potential use as a car dealership, and I asked, is this really what we want? I think it definitively is not. Rather, we are trying to transform these corridors into dense urban, mixed-use, and mixed-mode corridors, and we are trying to further important city goals, including reducing vehicle miles traveled by 50%. So honestly, I'm kind of baffled tonight by the suggestion that we should reallow these auto-oriented uses by right. Now, I'm going to admit, I've actually had some mixed feelings about certain kind of subcategories of these uses. I do personally find it useful to have an auto repair shop within walking distance of my house. I do understand that it will take incremental changes over time to reach the future that we're all envisioning. And Councilmember Briggs did make some fair points in her resolution initiating this effort. For example, saying that enabling convenient car rental locations could actually help households reduce car use and ownership overall. And that is, after all, what I want and what I think a lot of us want. I personally want a future where I no longer feel the need to be a car owner. But for that to happen, we do need to substantially transform our city. So the question I think we need to ask more broadly tonight is, how can we enable the flexibility we need in the short term and medium term, recognizing cars will continue to be a necessity for some for now, while still ensuring that the policy we've adopted will help us get where we want to go. Now, I actually kind of thought this was mostly subtle. I thought that the doctrine of continuing non-conforming use was sufficient to address those near-term needs. I'm hesitant to support y'all going any further than that. In one sense, and yeah, I can also see the rationale that says we should make TC1 more consistent with D1 and D2. I don't know, maybe the answer is that D1 and D2 are the districts that need to change here, not TC1. So, in any case, if you do feel the need to do something, I think allowing some of these uses as special exception uses, consistent with the current standards downtown, is the most you should do tonight. I think allowing these things by right is totally contradictory to what we're trying to accomplish here. I do not believe it will advance our goals. Thank you.
Our next caller is Michelle Hughes. You have permission to address the commission.
Hi. Yeah, I too am shocked and horrified to see car uses being put on as a by right primary use in these TC1 zones, because it was my understanding that the whole point of TC1 is to take these neighborhoods that are on transit corridors but are currently horrifying death stroads and turn them into comfortable, walkable neighborhoods. And allowing car uses there is the opposite of that. And I could kind of understand when somebody said having car rental in walking distance makes it easier to not have a car, but having a car sales definitely does not make it easier to not have a car. You know, that's promoting car use right there. You know, it's a car sales lot, a car repair lot. That is not going to be the kind of thing that's fun to walk by, even if it's in an attractive TC1 building. It's not something that's going to be activating the neighborhood. And these are neighborhoods that need a lot of help because they're currently horrifying death stroads. And so I think we need to go as far as we can in signaling that cars are guests here and aren't the primary residents of these neighborhoods, because there's going to be a great temptation to make car uses here and apply for special exception uses if there are special exception uses available. for these types of purposes. Yeah, even if you can make a car repair lot downtown, people are less likely to do that because that's just not what is happening in downtown right now. But in these terrifying death strokes, yes, car culture is exactly what's happening here. So we need to go further in countering the car culture. So please do not allow these car uses to come and ruin what's been happening with TC1. Thanks.
Our next caller is Brad Pritz, and one more hand raised after Brad Pritz. You have permission to address the commission.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. Brad Pritz from 3030 Lexington, Ward 2, and I am one who's dependent on the Plymouth corridor, so I watch this with interest. Let me take a different view from many of the other speakers. Let me say I agree very much with the long-term goals of TC1, sustainability and affordability. Those are both issues for our city that are very, very important. Let me, though, add, for those of us, including myself and my wife, who are mobility challenged, the ability to have ready use of a car is very important and will be for the rest of my life, however long that might be. And so let me say, I like your approach to say, let's have, for the building a less car-centric community, more carrots and fewer sticks. And I think the approach of, let's look at the form, and so long as a use fits with our form designs, then it should be allowed to go ahead. You're not going to get a modern car dealer building under these constraints. A car repair guy, sure. Anyway, that's my comment. Thank you again for your consideration.
Our next hand raised is Alex Lowe. You can address the commission.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Alex Lowe calling again from Southeast East Ann Arbor. TC1 is great. It really is. It's not perfect, but it's great. And I really am looking forward to developments that make it better. Unfortunately, with some of the proposed UDC amendments from staff, this ain't it, Chief. What's proposed here with allowing car-centric businesses is basically a Trojan horse being offered to the TC1 zone that, if accepted, would fundamentally undermine its purpose. So much of the city is already dedicated to car-centric businesses, and TC1 isn't going to force the existing businesses to change. What this proposal would allow is new car-centric businesses to replace existing businesses that are far more amenable to walkability and far more in line with TC1. So if we do really truly need to allow this addition of some new car-centric businesses to TC1, I think it is reasonable to allow them only as special exceptions where the addition of that business will actually improve that TC1, as opposed to by right, which is just ridiculous at this point. I'd also like to see some additional requirements to ensure that the changes are in line with the city's vision to reduce carbon emissions and increase sustainability. For example, one big one is don't allow this to be the only use. If you have to have a car rental That's great. Put it in the parking garage along with a bunch of retail and some apartments. Easy, easy peasy. Second, let's limit this and say, okay, we're only going to allow this if all of the cars there are electric. And third, along with that, let's make sure that that any of the cars that are being rented out, etc., the property owner provides green renewable energy to replace all of the energy consumption of those vehicles. Perhaps through on-site solar, perhaps through off-site wind, etc. Thank you.
That's our last hand raised, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So now we will close the public hearing, and I will read the motion. So the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve amendments to Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, Section 5.15 and 5.16 to allow automobile, motorcycle, recreational vehicle, equipment sales, and rental as a primary use, Section 5.15, Table 5.15-1, to allow automobile, truck, and construction equipment repair as a primary use, Section 5.15, Table 5.15-1, and to redesign the transit corridor development use-specific standards table to clarify the building typologies and application of standards. Section 5.16, Table 5.16-2. Moved by Commissioner Hammerschmidt, seconded by Commissioner Dish. We can have discussion. Commissioner Dish.
Oops. I wanted to ask a question about does the distinction between by right and special exception use become less significant when you're working with a form-based code?
That is a great question, and I'm not, I guess I don't know. I can mull it over and I can think about it. My working definition of a special exception use, a zoning district has permitted principal uses, meaning they are appropriate everywhere, anywhere, regardless of context. And a special exception use is something that could be appropriate in that particular district based on context. And yes, I can see arguments where if you have a form-based code that which is very heavy, form-based code, and it would, if it's so strong in form, it has dictated the context, and therefore maybe there are no special exception uses in a form-based code. I will say that our UDC is not a full form-based code. We borrow elements from it, but it's not a full-on official form-based code.
So I want to say that the reason I asked that question is because as I was reading the staff report, I was very, oops, I'm looking at the public comment right now. I think I paraphrased it, but this part I didn't. Existing form-based standards make us more confident to permit limited automobile-related uses. That's my paraphrase right there. Because we know that whatever else they will have to conform to the things that we have said you have to do in TC1 to not recreate the landscape of a 1960s or 1970s shopping mall. So I was open to that suggestion, if it is a suggestion on your part. but I am not sure that I think that there isn't still a place for the distinction between permitted uses and special exception uses, even though we've made all uses conform to something that creates a different environment than what is currently on these corridors. It might still be the case that we want to consider carefully what kind of auto repair or auto sales it is. And I don't think that I would be surprised if we could write into law we're only going to sell electric vehicles. We probably can't do that. But if it's a special exception use, we could think about which, do we need a truck dealership? And that was probably a rude thing. I didn't mean that. Yeah, right, exactly. I want the kind of truck that can run my house when DTE collapses. I can see why we could use both. It's not redundant. And I could see also, though, that even if it's not a permitted use, even if it's a special exception use, we've still got the flexibility to encourage existing uses to modify themselves and get closer to what we're looking for, rather than to simply be phased out. I thought that was one of the very persuasive parts of your memo, that as it is right now, we kind of freeze. Whatever's there is frozen the way it is, and it's either a conforming thing and then we like that, or it's a non-conforming thing and we're just waiting for it to die. But that could take a long time. Bad things live a long time. So I feel persuaded by that part of your memo around why we need to be open to thinking about how the long term, it's not as though we're trying to preserve these uses, it's actually because we want to change them. So, but, okay, I'm sorry, that's like too much of my thinking out loud, but, okay.
What else? Okay, I'll start with questions. I have a lot. Okay. I got really technical on this one. I got really technical. So I guess I have just maybe definitions to start. Mm-hmm. Outdoor sales permanent. That's not outdoor sales of car. That's already a permitted primary use. Can you give an example of what outdoor sales permanent would be?
When we had a Kmart at Maple Village, it had a outdoor sales area which they use seasonally, but that was a permanent outdoor sales space shown on the site plan where they put stuff for sale out there.
It could be like a garden center or lumber yard kind of site adjacent to a big box or anything else.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. There are very few of those in the city. It's in most zoning ordinances, you identify it and regulate it, but that's what permanent outdoor sales are. This would be compared to like if a grocery store puts up a tent in their parking lot for 2 weeks in May to do flower sales or something like that.
But we have a temporary outdoor sales as well.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's the difference between permanent outdoor sales and temporary.
Which might take over parking spaces.
Right. I'm not 100% certain, but like, for example, Bill's Beer Garden might be permanent outdoor sales. It's not.
But it has parking spaces. So it's a vehicular use area.
Maybe that is not like the one example then, but I'm saying,
But I guess so what I guess I'm asking about that, is there ever a condition that a vehicular use area and a permanent outdoor sales area would overlap as the same surface area? Or could be adjacent to each other. So right now we have vehicular use area, 100% of the building footprint area. Mm-hmm. But could you get, if you had a 100,000 square foot site and I had a 25,000 square foot building, so I had a single first floor building, or two-story building, right? 25,000 square foot footprint, then I could have a 25,000 square foot vehicular use area, because that would match at 100%. Mm-hmm. And then could I have a 25% or 50% of my lot coverage be outdoor permanent sales. So all of a sudden, I have a footprint of 25% building coverage and 75% open area.
I would say yes and no. Yes, you can have those three uses on your site, but the permanent outdoor sales area doesn't, it's not building footprint, so it doesn't increase your site. In the TC1 district, it doesn't count towards the percentage or the surface area matching for the vehicular use area.
Right. So like it could be additive, like, but we still have minimum and maximum setback standards that we need to cover. So it's not like you can just squish your building into a point tower and have a big open space plan in TC1 in a lot of ways.
Well, you could have the big open space plan, but it can't be a big parking lot.
Right, but it could be a big open outdoor sales.
It could be.
Yep, okay. Okay. I just want to, I was like, now that we're addressing short-term car storage, that's a parking lot, right? What is short-term car versus medium-term car? Both are not allowed in TC1 right now. But just to get definitions of what all these.
Let me see how.
Sorry, I told you I was about to.
The short-term car, that's like less than 7 days, right?
So hold on, I did highlight them, but I just want to because they were still a little. Short-term. All it says is the site must have at least 87,000 square feet, 2 acres of vehicular use area. So we would not allow a site to be that large, 87,000 square foot site.
That's 2 acres, yeah.
2 acre vehicular use with parking as approved, with a P district on an approved site plan. So it would have to be zone P.
Yeah. Short-term and there we go. Short-term car storage is parking of personal, privately owned vehicles in parking lots for up to 14 days. This use is typically associated with car sharing services or park and ride services.
Okay.
And the only place that's currently eligible for this is the Briarwood parking lot.
Okay. Because that's not car rentals because they're not personally owned.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So this is where, like, if you want to take the air ride from Briarwood to the airport and leave your car there, I guess for free, you can do that.
Got it.
And then the medium term.
It's like 30.
Is like 30 days.
Yeah.
That enables someone within a large parking lot to, say, store vehicles for the defined period of time, which I believe is 30 days, to more effectively use a parking lot. But again, it's for how to better utilize super large parking lots. So your site has to be zoned P, and it has to have a certain size area. So those uses are not permitted in the
TC1. Yeah, I just want to kind of get a definition to be like, does this fit under the, why isn't car sales medium or short-term car storage, outdoor car storage sort of thing? That's I just want to kind of like understand why we have these separate categories and what exactly falls into it. So
yeah.
So it could be, I'm just trying to think of it in a scenario, like Briarwood might give space in their parking area when they get an extra, like an oversized shipment of cars for their dealership that don't fit on their lot, sort of thing, right?
Yeah, Briarwood has asked, this came from, I think at the time it was written, there was a manufacturer that was doing recalls, maybe Volkswagen or something, and a nearby dealership received a big influx of cars that they needed to address, and they couldn't store them on their site. So they were stored off-site. And I think this is, that's what you're getting at. Say you have a large shipment of vehicles that are not personally owned, you don't need, there's no point in, you don't want someone to build a new parking lot just for this one purpose. Let's utilize the existing parking lot. But that's where it is. I think maybe what you're going, I wonder if you're, when staff was considering allowing the automobile sales and rental, I think that the dealership, the showroom portion is not the objectionable part. That's where if you are inside of a building, there's a population out there who may think walking past a showroom is great, like see the new shiny cars. It's the outdoor storage of the new inventory that's the objectionable part. And I would argue in the TC1 district, though that dealer owner will have to make a hard choice. You're only allowed so many parking spaces based on your building size. Are you going to use those for new vehicle inventory? Are you going to use those for customer or employee parking? And if you're in a mixed use with like an auto dealership on the first floor, something above it, you've got to balance if you're providing that parking. I think this is where some of the short-term, medium-term parking come into play. You can buy even a car online. We can have businesses that separate the showroom from the inventory spot. And I think this was some of our reasoning why, if a business such as auto sales or rental was willing to meet our forum standards, you can be that first floor use. They will have to figure out someplace else for where they store their vehicles in a more appropriate spot.
So I guess I'm working kind of backwards from the logic of if we're selling cars versus TVs, storing a product for sale. A car is a product in storage. Is that different? Is that different than a car? A car versus a product relative to what we call the space that it's stored in. And I guess what I want to confirm is that there's no wiggle room that a parking space is also a car storage space relative to these two uses. Like there's no other space that a developer could build out to increase the amount of places you could put a car on a site in TC1. Like we have maximum parking requirements, and that would be kind of the one-to-one measurement of our form-based code of how many cars you could store relative to like fixing a truck or selling. You have 80 parking spaces, you only have 80 cars, and pick how you use them for customer parking or your stock. And that you can't say, oh, well, that's my outdoor sales area, and you park them, bumper to bumper. Like, is that a lot? Like, can you park cars bumper to bumper in an outdoor sales area for a dealership?
I do think that, so absent permanent outdoor sales, I think the TC1 district is tight in that regard. I do think the definition of permanent outdoor sales would allow an outdoor auto dealership.
Outside of their parking counts.
Yes. Now we could also have a discussion about, is inventory storage part of the sales area, or is that outdoor storage?
Right, like is that a sales area that people can walk through to look at the inventory, or is it long-term storage that only staff can access to be able to like grab the keys and shuffle it around?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to break this into what a savvy car dealer would expand the amount of footprint for outdoor cars. And I guess that's where I really see outdoor sales permanent is vague enough to maybe allow cars to also creep into that area along with that 100% building footprint parking area as like a moment of conflict or doubling down on how many cars we actually are going to see on any one lot. Is that hazy to you too?
I would, as staff, I would say, I think I see in black and white the thread the needle. I think a highly motivated person might be able to present this, or at least apply.
To do both.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But I think of all of the uses that are permitted in the TC1 district and where the TC1 district is going to be located, I don't see that as being a car dealer's best option to do. Like, the sales and use is not the only use permitted in the district. It's one of many uses. And I don't see the demand for brand-new auto dealerships. I think that the classic auto dealerships do not want to be on Stadium anymore. They've moved out, actually. What we may see are the sort of online-based, or somebody who just wants a showroom, a more newer, modern. The newest car dealership on Stadium Boulevard that we've seen it was a Fiat dealership.
Yeah, next to the
and
post office.
And next to the post office, and now it's turned into the car right. I think that that's probably more likely what we're going to see, just because that is the way auto vehicle sales are moving. And with land values the way that they are, I don't see it worth somebody's effort to work that hard when it would be much easier. And so that's my.
I don't know, a tiny bank footprint
Well,
is worth $3 million to buy a vacant office building and demo. So that's where I have concerns, because there are especially a couple of large lots that if building construction is exceptionally high, being able to build the minimum viable building, utilize the maximum amount of currently available land area to just turn cars actually seems like a feasible option to pack them in.
Our experience in downtown, however, has been not the minimum size building that you can possibly get, but the maximum size building that you can get.
Right. But there is, right now, all of downtown is walkable, and we're trying to move that way and change that kind of value and lever structure, and I don't think we're there yet. And so that's where we need to be able to kind of stopgap momentum in the wrong direction. And my concern is, what will pencil out now might be a tiny dealership with a lot of cars, if you can fit some of them in your parking area and some of them in your outdoor sales area, as a consideration. So I'm jostling with that one. Parking structures are an accessory use, right? That's what I have too. So I'm just going to kind of
Parking structure are an accessory use in the TC1 district.
Which means that's just the use case. So you have to have a primary use, and I know we kind of have gone back and forth for clarification. I think it's pretty clear the footprint of vehicular use area, which is outside of the building, can be 100% of the building footprint. But once you get inside of that form, that can be a building structure as long as it doesn't exceed our parking maximums. Right, so I can have like 3 stories of parking in the building to get up to my parking maximums, even if the square footage of parking area between the vehicular use area and my parking structure is more than the footprint of my building.
Yes, and that's what it says. It says we are limiting the surface area devoted to parking, but we are not, but that is not one and the same as the maximum number of parking spaces.
Yep. So then, I'll go all the way back to repeating myself about adaptive reuse and parking structures, and how we typically in America build them as slope floors, which are very hard to adaptively reuse, versus doing them as flat floors with, spiral access points. And so if there is alternatively another way for this to kind of get leverage to really, I know we have parking maximums, but to really maximize out that parking storage, there may be a higher likelihood that we're seeing parking structures which are not readily adaptable. Unless we write into our code a form-based requirement of how those are designed to be horizontal slabs, right? Which I believe, is that
I think it's
applicable to UDC, or is that building code? Are we threading a needle there too?
No, I mean, we currently do not have any such standards for parking structures. They can be added. That's a form-based thing.
So I'm just going to put that one out there too. I guess that just circles back to does car storage equal parking maximums? And relative to a savvy outdoor permanent salesperson, we might be able to thread that needle. I will say, what I did find interesting was 5.16.3C, which allowed or required in the C2B district, storage and repair of automobiles, trucks, and construction equipment must be located in an enclosed building. That seemed like something, when I was thinking about amendments, to include along with C2B, TC1, to make sure that the repair of automobiles isn't happening outside, that we kind of capture more of that maybe in the ground floor, back of the building sort of thing. If we're trying to hold more in a building to get more building, doing the same measures that we're doing for C2B relative to the same use might be another restriction we might want to apply. Alternatively, special exception use. So I saw that as maybe a benefit for the repair. It isn't applied to anywhere for the auto sales or rental. And that's where I jostle with, like, is it a benefit to put that in a building? Do we get more slope fillers? Do we need to go write another, portion of the amendment too? So I'm just going to put that on the table before I come back, if maybe that's opened up some thoughts for other commissioners. And I think the last thing relative to the 70%, 30 to 45 feet, it says adjacent to residential zoning. I know we're going to talk about club. Should it be residential use? Is it relevant? Should it just be adjacent to districts requiring a club? A conflicting land use buffer? Just semantics of calling it residential zoning versus residential use.
But say that first part again.
So let me go to the table. In the table, if I can find it again, sorry, is 70% lot width, provided this allows 30 feet between building and side lot normally, or 45 feet between the building and side lot when adjacent to a residential zoning. And I understand that to be purposefully to help support a conflicting land use buffer, like to give some space there, because that's not a required setback. It's just 70% with that wiggle room for that reason, right?
Yeah. That is purposeful. The conflicting land use buffer section in the landscaping section says that TC1 district only needs to be buffered when adjacent to a residential zoning district.
Okay.
Or a park.
Okay. So we don't have to worry about the other club because we have a language tightened for this.
In the downtown area and in the TC1 district, we do not require buffering from land used for residential. This would be introducing conflicting land use buffers. Almost maybe every single lot would need to buffer from every single lot.
Right.
You'd be possibly having 30 feet of building, breaking up that street wall, which is not what we want to do.
Right. Okay. Okay, those are mine for now. So I would say, like in summary, the things that I'm considering are how much do we open this up for car storage based on what we currently have as permitted uses? Concerns about what we're doing exterior versus what we might want to include in the building, similar to what we have in 516.3C for repair, and what we think about parking structures and their building form standards. If anyone else has comment. Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Okay. You're making me think a lot, and it's too late for that. So I have a really easy question to start, as you were just sort of going through, and because you're like the TC1 like guru. Mm-hmm. So the 100 feet, first of all, the table clarifications look so much easier to read, so thank you. 100 feet from the signaled intersection, awesome change. If you had a building that was like, part of it was 100 feet, but part of it was 200 feet, but it was all the same building, you could have residential use past the 100 feet, right? I just wanted to clarify. Okay, yeah. Perfect. Okay. The reason that we're including sales and repair and rentals all sort of together from the council resolution was sort of to provide flexibility, right? So like, if you had a car rental, if you had like an enterprise that wanted to locate on the corridor, if we didn't have them all sort of together, if they wanted to like sell a vehicle, as I think they do, that would not be allowed, right? Like, is that sort of why we're considering these all of these uses sort of together?
Well, there are two, as in our current format, there are just two uses. One is sales and rental.
Oh, that's one together.
That's one
oh,
together.
Okay. And then repair is one.
Repair is one.
Got it. Okay.
And the definition of repair almost makes it seem like putting windshield wipers on it when the staff of the auto parts store puts windshield wipers on, that becomes a auto repair. I mean, and so like, and yeah, the rental part, and even technically the sales part, even if if a classic car kind of guy and you're just sitting at your home on your computer, on the internet, like dealing, like buying from one guy and selling it to another guy, you never take possession of the car, you're still a car dealer. But it covers the gamut, but sales and rental is one use.
Got it,
and
sorry.
Repair
Yes.
is one use.
Okay. I mean, I guess where my head is at right now, like, I am, I guess, more leaning on the form-based code aspect of it. So we know that we're limiting any use to look like how we want it to look, to, you know, have the walkability aspects of it that we want them to have. But what you just said about, like, kind of breaking it, especially with the parking garage thing, I would be open to, like, form-based parking garages if that's something that we can do, because, like, I hadn't even thought of that until you brought it up the other week about, like, the angled parking, and, like, you can't just adaptively reuse that. I mean, I do still sort of think that we're in an inflection point in this city where, like, people are still relying on vehicles for better or worse, and I guess I'm maybe a little more cautious, and maybe I'm being naive, but, like, I'm sort of on your, like, what you were saying about, like, just the way that people are doing business. Like, I don't see, like, these big car dealerships trying to come and, like, locate on Stadium. Like, they're going to go out to the townships where they actually have room. But if they want to, and there are urban car dealerships, I was Googling them, like, that they can look okay. And, you know, if they're going to replace something that isn't a form that we want, like, maybe that's okay. I would like to have more of a conversation, I think, around the special exception use aspect of it, because I'm torn. Because I think that, like, we already know what we would approve if we made these special exception uses. So I'm kind of like, what's the point? Like, maybe we should just, like, say what we want instead of pretending that we would actually consider something that we don't want, if we don't want some of these things. So I'm saying, like, I'm ready to vote yes, I want to move this along, but, like, if there are things that we think are, like, deal breakers, like, now I'm a little concerned about this, like, outdoor storage thing, then let's talk about it before we send it on. Commissioner Clark?
So can I just clarify about the parking, the sales, to kind of pick that apart a little bit further? Sorry. So I noticed, like, on Jackson Road, there's a couple parking lots that are just, I don't know, the buildings are long gone and there's just, like, an errant parking lot. And it's kind of just like a budget used car lot. I wouldn't necessarily think that someone would go and build a car lot for that specific purpose, but I worry about it delaying progress with, like, well, if you can just rent it out for your vacant parking lot to put a very makeshift car dealership there, is there incentive to invest in that parcel, or are you just going to keep renting it for that immediate purpose for however long? I guess there might be something that's already preventing that. But yeah, there are a couple examples on Jackson Road. You just go a little bit west, and yeah, and they've been there a while. So just curious.
If that's a question, I believe that we do allow that, rent out your parking lot for car storage, but it's not permitted in TC1. So we have a way to, if that were to occur in the TC1 district, that's a violation of the zoning ordinance. And we could enforce it in that way. If that was occurring in a P parking district that was, met the threshold, that's actually not a violation, that would be conforming. But in the TC1 district, that would be not a permitted land use, and that could be enforced.
Just for my own understanding, I'm just, what's the distinction between the scenario that Commissioner Savi described with an enterprising dealership, if they wanted to find that technicality? What's the distinction there between them, just like kind of, like, what would be the limiting factor there?
So we're on our working interpretation here, on a site, they could have a building of X size, and maybe the first floor of that building is a car dealership, and they could have a parking lot of the same X size. And so maybe that, because of the dealership size and the building size, maybe that parking lot is 50 spaces or something like that. And that would be, that 50 spaces would be, unless they built a parking structure, that 50 spaces would be for every use on the site, including customers and employees and car inventory, and sales inventory and so forth. But if they also put a permanent outdoor sales area on a site plan, so they had not only their building and the vehicular use area, they could have an undetermined size outdoor sales area where they may display X number, a few or a lot of cars. And so they would be trying to say that this big area of cars is not car storage. They're like, this is our outdoor car store.
Thanks. It kind of clicked partway through. It's late. And then one more question, just kind of again, just another scenario to kind of, so if we're worried about things like, let's say, minimizing conflict points with pedestrians, and you're having a showroom there, would we want a scenario where, let's say, however many customers per hour are driving in and out of a vehicle and adding those, entering and exiting through, as opposed to a different use where it would be people maybe walking up to an urgent care or people walking up to just, any other business, versus something that's actively encouraging cars to be coming in and out? And I just, just something to think about.
Don't we need to prohibit permanent outdoor sales?
Yeah, that's I think, like, I guess I know this isn't what was on it, but kind of running through the scenarios, if we open a valve, I feel like there's kind of a valve to kind of close to mitigate the compounding effect of this. And I guess I see a few ways forward, which if we maintain outdoor sales, it really is, the special exception use allows us to measure the full site plan as presented. If they are trying to do that parking area and the outdoor sales, we have some discretion to then evaluate, they are trying to thread this needle, this is not the intent, and then we can kind of push back on the kind of doubling up of outdoor area versus building volume that we want. So I think the cleanest way for me, I guess, is I either want it in the building, and I want that building to have flat floors, or I want it to be a special exception use, because it's just too many open valves to add this in. I absolutely, I understand kind of sales going for, I've been in a lot of cities, and you walk by any other thing, and I think it's things like, we talk about vehicle sales, this says automobile and truck, but it's like scooters, all sorts of mobility can really be in a lot of these storefronts. The test driving, I hear you. So I don't know, maybe I'm just gonna open up the discussion and see if there's which way. I'm happy to make a motion, but it's either special exception use or including it as interior space with horizontal floors somehow. Maybe staff can weigh into what's actually cleaner to move forward. I think the second one sounds a little messy because we're inventing a new kind of form-based way recommendation moving up the ladder to city council. But
I think, so my opinion is the special exception use should be used when it's just the character and the intensity of the land use itself is not appropriate throughout the district. And an example I often use in talking to someone is the residential districts allow the residential uses, single-family uses all over the place. That says if you're in this district, the home, the dwelling is permitted. But a childcare is a special exception use because it's not really appropriate everywhere. There's cul-de-sac streets, for example, probably not appropriate. But if the site for childcare is a big enough lot, if it's on the corner, if it's, then That's why it's not just allowed everywhere. It sounds to me that the concerns, which are legitimate, the concerns of maybe automobile sales are not because it's not appropriate everywhere. I've not heard like, I don't want it, it needs to be on the transit line or not. It needs to be here or here. I'm not actually hearing that. So I'm not hearing that it should be a special exception use. What I'm hearing is it needs better standards, or maybe the use needs to be broken down more individually, so it's not all forms of vehicle sales. We have found an example where there was, it could be personal vehicles and then heavy equipment. The same thing with repair. So that, I mean, if it helps the discussion at the table, what I haven't heard is that these uses, they can only go on a street of a certain size, they can't go here, they can't go there, they have to be within this proximity. I've not heard that. It's more, what I've heard is more about the unintended consequences or just the broadness of the use. And so therefore, I think the answer is to add better definition or nuance to permanent outdoor sales. I've heard maybe levels of auto sales and rental, maybe even repair, though that hasn't been as much of a discussion. But that's what I've heard the concerns are, and I don't think that special exception use is the tool to address those, to address what I've heard. And that's my opinion. Feel free to disagree.
Commissioner Clark?
Can I just add one quick comment? I'll keep it brief. I think something just that I haven't heard come up a lot is the relationship between the use of the property and to the idea of a transit corridor, of like moving people efficiently in general. And just maybe one of the core issues with the auto-centric uses is limiting flow of things like buses and having cars turning on and off and limiting it from being primarily literally anything that doesn't interfere with like a rapid bus transit or something. But you can't really have a rapid bus transit going down, Stadium if you're going to be having people testing out a brand new car they've never driven, trying to drive in and out, or you're going to have even like, the existing repair shops that are there. It's fine. That was another side. I was just curious what threshold, like percentage if an auto repair, sorry, this is a separate thought, I'm kind of jumping around. Just a question, what percentage would they have to be renovating their building to then have triggered the T1? I can't remember that offhand.
It's addressed in the non-conforming use section, and I think it's 50% for a non-residential use and 70% the expansion, when it's considered a new build, would be the 50% of the value.
So it'd be pretty substantial renovation for any repair shop or whatnot that's there. Yeah, I guess that would just be my concern, would be the only other factor would be just how it interacts with the idea of transit and efficiently moving people in the future of a rapid bus and minimizing conflict points with that.
Yeah, I do not have the numbers in front of me, but I do believe, fairly confident that in terms of trip generation, auto sales are much lower than other uses that are permitted in the TC1 district. For example, restaurants would have a much higher trip generation than auto dealership, including probably test drives.
Commissioner Weich?
Just a question about the comparison between the TC1 and the D1 as it relates to the auto use. So in the D1, D2, it is by special exception use?
I'm double checking that right now.
And then I wonder why, if it was in the council whereas clause, it didn't come across as a special exception use. Was that a staff decision to ignore that? And when I say ignore, I don't mean that maliciously, so don't read anything into that, Mr. Leonard.
For the vehicle sales and rental, it is a special exception use in the D1 and D2 districts, and it is a permitted use in C2B and C3.
Right.
For repair, the same. Special exception use in the D1 and D2, and a permitted principal use in the C2B and C3. I think that as staff, for the sort of the reasons I articulated previously, I didn't think we thought that it should be a special exception use because of our form-based controls. We thought it could it would fit in context everywhere that TC1 was zoned. And it is very valid if the commission disagrees.
Would a car multi-story elevator work? That is to say, it would have a short setback because they're those elevators. They probably would have to do a 15-foot first story, but outside of that, they could go up because the FAR would probably fit the footprint. So we could get a bunch of car elevators in the structure that we have right now. Is that?
We could, but that would be, yes, we could. And that would be, I think it'd be considered a building. Either way, it's a structure.
Yeah. And I'm pretty certain that's not what we want and what we'd like to do. So that's, for me, that's why I'm trying to figure out why we didn't bring the special exception use over, because it gives us the most amount of flexibility as the district transforms into what we want it to become. And if I understood the council member's concern, was by excluding it early, we harm the transition. I didn't hear the concern from council say that this is something we want to permit in perpetuity. It was something that we wanted to create an easier transition. And it would seem that the special exception use would allow us to enact that. And then there was something else you said earlier around, it's been my understanding that we do have rules for non-compliance, but we don't always enforce those rules.
I don't think. No, I don't think that is not what I was trying to articulate.
Oh, sure, and I don't need to put that into your in your comment. I think it was in response to something that Commissioner Sauvé said, which would be, we would be able to correct that through enforcement. And so I'm trying to understand how, because we have a lot of non-conforming things within planning, but we're not, like a lot of the conversation that I've been trying to have around R4C is non-conforming, but we're not going and saying this is non-conforming and it needs to come up to code. We wait till there is a change and then we bring it up to code. And so the enforcement is a lagging indicator in a sense. It's like a lagging tool. It's not a primary enforcement tool. So I just wrote that down as a, like, I don't think that's going to get what we want. But it was in something that you were talking about, like if somebody tried to like pencil in the parking lot and all these things to like really thread the needle, we have a tool to correct that, I think is how it came across, which is through enforcement. And I don't know if that meant you would prevent that through the building or through the enforcement of like the inspection of the site plan if somebody tried to do some trickery or some non-conforming thing. So anyway, it was just something that I noted, and I just don't see us using those enforcement tools. So you can clarify, if we had a stenographer, we could read back the transcript, but I'll have to do that after the meeting.
Maybe I'll just offer up the thoughts, maybe similar to drive-throughs and special exception, there was kind of a consensus of the intent behind it, like near highway interchanges on, off, that you're not kind of coming into their community and disrupting the flow of the neighborhood. we are open to considering it. Once we get into our neighborhood corridors, that's where we drew that line and kind of set it on West Stadium with Second Bank and then Plymouth Road. And it's almost like we want to say with special exception uses here, it's a special exception use when it's modifications to an existing building. We're not interested in a special exception to allow this in a new construction, is at least what I'm hearing as part of the discussion. And I think that's where, I hear both sides, like Staff DeLeo and Commissioner Hammerschmidt, about sometimes like sales can move, and is sales in a building, does that matter? But I guess what I disagree with is when you're changing windshield wipers. That's not a primary use as vehicle maintenance. Because we're talking about a primary use table. Selling cars online is not a primary use of a space. And that's what I kind of distill down to. Like, we're talking about primary use of these projects, not accessory uses or kind of, fringe uses. And so if we're selling cars online or like coordinating rental pickups, that's a desk job like an office use. It's an office use. I don't see that. If there's anything in the plan that is about myself instead of the use of the space and the impact of the space, that's why I think we have the uses delineated differently so that we can measure intensity differently. And when we start talking about the future of some of these uses, that intensity dwindles to start becoming office or something similar that we currently allow to be permitted. And I think that's maybe another kind of piece I'm grappling with is if it's lower intensity use, it might fall under a different category when we think about primary use table. Because I think you can change out a battery, and that's not the primary use of an auto zone. That just happens to be some subsidiary thing that you do. It's just good service, but it's not like, so I want to move this along, and like, this should be, it feels easy and it feels very hard at the same time. So I'm really, I feel like I'm really pulling all the weeds at this one. And I really threw in that outdoor sales thing. But yeah, I understand not the special exception use, but I actually think it's probably the clearest way to send a message about how we need to have early and frank discussions with projects about this, that without opening up too much potential for new projects in TC1. And so I think it's maybe the message I would say, and I'm going to make an amendment so we can kind of move a discussion somewhere. The message I would say with an amendment to include these two uses of special exception is that the intent is to request that staff maybe encourage any petitioner that brings a project to maybe bring to a working session, to have a pre-submittal, have an early conversation to see what it is, like if it's a big addition or something. But I think that that's the intent I think we're trying to convey. And I don't know the clearest way to do it.
I think one way, if I be so boldly butt in, would be to because there's 5 members present tonight, maybe maybe break up the motion and make an amendment on the parts that you feel confident to move forward, and to postpone postpone other elements that maybe need more consideration, revision, or maybe need to be then included with more amendments. To be, I get the sense we'd like to look a little more holistically, and there's probably a couple options, but to look at some things more holistically, maybe this entire package of amendments is not ripe for forwarding to City Council.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
There was a part 2, right? There was a part 2 of something else you were bringing back to us for TC1, and I'm forgetting what that is, but there was a part 2.
Related to the narrow rights of way.
Thank you. Until that even comes back and we move that on to City Council, they're not going to let us rezone any other corridors as TC1, right? So Well, I mean, not let
Sorry,
us,
I
but
need
like.
to say that out loud.
No,
'cause-
it's okay.
But even the amendment that brought this to the table said these changes should not delay the adoption of TC1. So
Is that what it said?
I just wanted to give that counterpoint
No,
that
thank you.
came out.
I was trying to buy us more
earlier.
time.
No, because there was a separate amendment to Briggs's original motion that struck something that was like, and we recognize that this will slow down or delay the implementation of TC1. And it was struck from the amendment because it is my understanding of watching council that they want the TC1s to move throughout the city.
Okay,
so-
somebody said something here tonight that made me think that we
Mr.
weren't.
Leonard
Was it
did.
you?
So I would, Commissioner Weich is right, that I had proposed, I just want to be frank, I proposed that language because modifying this district has consequences. And yes, that was struck, but I would reiterate my position. The reason, a factor in that resolution being presented back to Planning Commission was there was ambivalence from my perspective at the city council table of rezoning a corridor to TC1 because there was concerns outstanding on those matters. Those were specific issues that were raised. And I'll just reiterate my premise that until those are resolved, I think bringing any additional areas, those questions are going to remain in the minds of city council. I'm projecting that. I'm basing it on the experience of the past rezoning, but that's why I think it's important that we advance those changes prior to pursuing additional geographies.
Okay, what is the timeline for the setback thing? My voice is going.
We were hoping to shift to that after the automobile uses was resolved.
Oh, so you don't want to do them at the same time. I mean, I do sort of, to Ms. DeLeo's suggestion, like, I think that maybe makes sense. Or, I mean, if it was a special exception use for everything, Commissioner Sovay said something about not on new buildings, just a special exception use for these uses on existing buildings, or?
Well, I think similar to drive-throughs, we've kind of taken a position, right? Special exception is about a certain context. And so to Ms. DeLeo's point, what we talked about was context. And so drive-throughs, it was like it's close to an interchange. You're quick on, quick off. You're not coming into our neighborhood. That has context ambitions. But at least it was kind of like clear, like we drew a line, this, not that. In terms of special exception is about the expectation. Is there a way to clearly communicate this, not that, in a similar fashion with special exception here? And I think that's where it's different because it's not about context relative to, the planning opinion of, how we use our ordinance policy to do it versus how we're talking about how we want to try to regulate that land use. So it's different but the same in terms of trying to draw like splitting hairs on when it might be appropriate or not. So at least we can communicate that earlier so that we don't have people like coming all the way to site plan and be like, we told you this was not part, qualifying as a special exception use. Can I just add,
No. Yes, go ahead.
I know, but I want to, I'm supposed to give everybody the platform. I'm practicing. I think there's equal ambivalence at this table as there is at City Council relative to TC1 on the other side. Ambivalence to adopt maybe at City Council until things are cleared up, and I think ambivalence to make changes until we see more movement. So that's where I also see kind of a conflict of should we wait, should we do between these two tables? And I'm trying to kind of reconcile and appreciate, a lot of the professional opinion and then poke those loopholes because we want to have projects come before us that set a positive and ambitious precedent for the types of projects we're trying to see. And if we see a dealership with offices on the second floor, with a parking lot, a parking structure, and an outdoor sales use as the first project in TC1, I feel like we would be taking so many more steps back in terms of where this where I think there are a lot of strong moments of this policy, instead of keeping it tight to the things we know we can get out of it as it stands right now.
I was going to say maybe it depends on what it replaces, but maybe it doesn't actually depend on what it replaces. And I think you're right about the ambivalence. Like, I want to keep rezoning and just sort of fix TC. Like, Plymouth could, and Washtenaw could bring up issues, again, that nobody had thought of. Mr. Leonard, can you remind me, where are they on our work plan right now? Are they sort of postponed because we're dealing with this, or next year, this year?
So generally, our timeframe with TC1 was to resolve the TC1 direction that council has provided. Then we were contemplating simultaneous rezoning of both Washtenaw and Plymouth. So based on timing, I mean, you were in the midst of this as we are at this table, trying to predict how long the first part of that will take. I want to be clear. We've been having a lot of conversation as staff with other property owners and potential developers regarding the TC1. And I want to be clear, we have 10 other suggestions that have been proffered. And I can't sit here and tell you which among those I think are good, which of those I think we should pursue, which of those that don't rise to prominence for me. We're trying hard to get this district in a form that works. I do want to be clear and honest. We have yet to have a TC1 proposal in any district. I don't want to say that that is because the district is bad. I think the district is sound. You'll recall when we started this conversation, we presented a lot of different scenarios. We talked about varying approaches, different TC districts. We talked about trying to build upon some of the known quantities and regulatory frameworks of our existing districts. We very intentionally tried to use building blocks from some of the things that were within our ordinance. So I think it's sound, but I think it's fair to also sit here with the experience that you, as the Planning Commission, have not yet seen a TC1 proposal. And so there could be a lot of factors to that. I frankly think that economic factors are a big part of that. Building right now is very difficult. But I will say there are other proposals happening. You are seeing other proposals. So I just want to, I put that out there to say I acknowledge that tension of trying to rezone more areas to TC1 and getting areas TC1 zoning more appropriate. I advise, my opinion is that we are having this conversation because there was unease at the council table. I can't speak for council at that moment. I'm telling you how I interpreted that. And I'm projecting how that unease might carry forward to the next districts. There might be new issues as well. So I don't even want to suggest that resolving these two will be a panacea, that those similar questions won't be raised. But I think it's sound to try to be responsive to what the council's asked us to do before we lay that next conversation on their lap.
Can I ask one more thing, and then I'll stop because I won't be able to talk anymore. If we said we want these uses permitted, we need a special exception use, can we put conditions around special exception uses? Like, can we say, like, if you do a parking garage, it has to have flat floor plates, or?
Yes, but that would suggest to me that we have some more work to do to present you
Yeah.
that text
Okay.
that achieves that.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner White.
Just to clarify, this came in at the transition point of the old council to the new council, and it was championed by, if I remember correctly, a single council member. So when we talk about unease, I just want to contextualize it that it was not a majority of the council. So it wasn't a mandate in terms of it. I hear you sit in a very unique position. It's a different position than I sit in. And I respect that position, and I respect that you see the proposals and you hear from the developers and you are talking to the policymakers and you're trying to create a vision for what's going to work and what's going to move through. But we do have a new council. This table, I think, to be kind, to use the kind words that Commissioner Sauvé sort of intimated, there's some ambivalence, is how I would look at that. And so I see this, I am struggling with this because it's slowing down what we need to do. And then we're seeing petitions that are getting in this transition that aren't in our 50-year plan. We know in our 50-year plan, we do not want to dedicate this much land to these kinds of uses. And so if that is what is known, and that is the trajectory, or to use a term that I use in my profession, our telos, it is our future, it is time for us to activate our future at the table. And if that means that we do it by special use exception, or we just ban it altogether and send it back to council and say, we looked at all of this, here's where we're going, we do not agree. That's where I would sit. So, to give you feedback to Ms. DeLeo, because I didn't say much at the beginning. So just some more piece. And let me just say, I did not say this, tables look great. Thank you for those changes. I would love to have seen these separate so that we could just heap praise on the changes that you are making, and thanks for your both your expertise, your knowledge, and your diligence in this work. We are the beneficiaries of your good stewardship.
Okay, I'm gonna rip this Band-Aid off, and I'm gonna make a motion to amend to make special exception for the auto truck repair and the auto sales. And my reasoning for this is I do want to move this forward. It's going to technically fail, and we can continue this discussion, whatever council wants to kind of do next with it. But also, if the intent is that some of these uses are moving forward in a way that are reduced in intensity to what we're seeing now, like we're selling more things online and we're having inventory offsite, we might deliver it and things like that, then it might fall under a different use category as the primary, and the special exception should be evaluated in terms of what level of use is it actually doing in intensity of the site versus these. So really the question is not where, but I think when it applies that they need to request a special exception, it's to the discretion of, is this cutting the threshold from like office sales to auto sales relative to a primary use when we're talking about how sales are transitioning in this modern era? So I think that's what I'm also kind of hearing, that there is some gray area in the type of sales, and if auto sales looks the same, and when it does look like this, I have concerns about car storage and what we're prioritizing there in a reform, and how much more parking structure we might get instead of apartments. So I have two amendments. One is a motion to change the auto, truck, and equipment repair and the auto sales and rental to a special exception use on the table. My second motion, and I can take them one at a time, but okay.
Yeah, I moved your first one.
Okay. Moved by me, seconded by Commissioner Weish. Sorry. So I guess we'll take that one up for discussion for that motion.
Can you just repeat it?
Sorry. It is to change from a permitted use to a special exception use for the auto, truck, equipment repair and the auto sales and rental. So the first two of the three bullet points of the original motion. To be a special exception use instead of primary use. Any discussion? No? Ms. Kelly, can we have a roll call?
Sure. On the motion presented, Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Yes.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Yes.
Commissioner Dish.
No.
Commissioner.
You said it wasn't the tool to use, and so I am just not in a place where I can think about this.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Commissioner Weish.
Yes.
that would carry.
Okay. Back to the original motion. I'm going to make a new motion that is to apply the use-specific standards 5.16.3C to the automobile, truck, construction, and equipment repair, which currently is applied to C2B, which, just to kind of read for everyone's edification, requires storage and repair of automobiles, trucks, and construction equipment must be located in an enclosed building. So I want to motion to apply that use-specific standard. Yeah. Because it's called out in the uses for just C2B relative to that table. So, seconded by Commissioner Weich. Discussion.
Question. That sounds good to me, but I remember us discussing this at some point, either when we were having the endless maker discussion or some other time about, would you be able to fix your bicycle in your driveway or something like that? Is there anything that staff would like to raise about why not to do this? Or implications that we need to think through, really, is actually what I mean to say.
I would not want to evaluate or analyze at the table.
Okay.
But I would offer that when preparing the next version of the ordinance, and we'd also prepare a briefer transmittal memorandum to cover, if we have then flagged something, we would articulate that to council and expanding or saying that a different way, when we're then working to fulfill the Planning Commission's recommendation to council, we imply a recommendation to city council as well, and we could say, this is what the city council has this is what the Planning Commission has recommended. We do see this concern, though, and we may then suggest something along those lines, but that would be in like the worst-case scenario. But I'll go back to my original point. I'm just not sure at this time, like, yes, do I see an unintended consequence with that? I don't see it right now. But as part of our work to forward your work to City Council, if I do then see a concern, I would articulate that as well and make some sort of recommendation, whether it be I have an alternative that fixes, or whether it should be postponed and returned for more work, depending on what I may or may not see.
Okay, I mean, I will say that as the attentive traveler that I am, when I'm in urban places like Paris, it is all inside. And you peer in the windows and you're like, oh my God, that's an auto repair in there. And so I can see that makes a lot of sense and is a clean amendment, I think. So.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Which, can you say it again?
Yep.
It's 5.16.
5.16.3C.
Okay. I heard you say B, and I was like, I just want to clarify.
That's Art
it's C.
Studio. No.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
C1,
I'm just hearing things.
C2B district, storage and repair of automobiles, trucks, and construction equipment must be located in an enclosed building. Which I believe the intent is don't have junkyards.
And your intention is to add TC1 to that list?
Correct. So it's in that, I would say C, automobile 1, TC1, and C2B district. Because right now, relative to that table, it flags it, but when you go to this, it only calls out C2B as the applicable use scenario, even though there's more than one district permitted to have this in it. So that's how I read the UDC.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm following this.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, ready for vote?
On the motion as presented, Commissioner Hammerschmidt,
Yes.
Commissioner Salve,
Yes.
Commissioner Dish,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner White.
Yes.
That carries.
Okay, back to the original motion. Staff, are we clear? Can we help?
So the two modifications are shifting automobile sales and repair, the two uses from permitted uses to special exception uses, and modifying 5.16.3 to list both C2B and TC1.
Correct.
And I think Alexis helped me. I think 516.3 is probably already listed in the use table for repair.
Yep.
Why does my
Commissioner Dish?
version say P?
I want to just ask about one more thing, if it's possible or if it's too stupid and too nitty-gritty that we can't do it. But would there be, I can see why we would not want to prohibit, what is it called now, permanent outdoor sales from TC1, because that can be like a flea market. You know, like people like those. That's what we want. That can be pedestrian friendly. But I cannot envision any moment of my life in which I would want a car dealership to have a permanent outdoor sales, because it's more parking lot. We are not interested in parking lots. So could we prohibit that from things that sell, rent, and repair automobiles and trucks and machinery? I would like to do that.
So outdoor sales of other things is okay, but outdoor sales of vehicles, motorcycles, electric vehicles, cars is not okay.
Can I just?
Go ahead.
I think it's, if I'm understanding, there's a distinction between outdoor sales area and the vehicular use area. And you could still sell cars and motorcycles and things in a vehicular use area.
They're using parking spaces.
Yeah, but you couldn't do that and do it in the outdoor sales area if.
But you could have a
both.
parking area and an outdoor sales area. We're just saying that we care about what's in that outdoor sales area, and vehicles we prefer not, but other outdoor sales items, trees, landscaping materials are okay, but vehicles not.
They're seasonal.
No, it's permanent.
Outdoor sales.
Lumberyard.
Yeah, okay, this is why I asked, if it doesn't make sense to do that.
Well, it's a question. Like I understand. I think that our perception is that outdoor sales of vehicles is going to be more adverse to the goals of the corridor maybe than other outdoor sales. I'm not absolute about that. It's still open space. It's still going to have often not a feeling of protection maybe to the sidewalk. It is a question.
I mean, people choose Christmas trees. They walk around lots that are filled with Christmas trees, and it smells good, and it's festive, and they hang lights. A lot filled with cars looks a lot like a parking lot, whether they're parked or whether they're in inventory.
And people walk around and look at them.
They do, but they can do that inside too or online. I mean, I don't mind walking by a Christmas tree lot. It doesn't make me comfortable walking by a huge parking lot. And I don't know if this is a distinction without a difference, but I do know that when you raised the issue of, what is it called when you stack parking? I guess it's called stack parking.
Yeah.
When you just line up one after the other, that's an unpleasant pedestrian experience, which I do not want there to be any doubt that we can't do.
Commissioner Clark?
Can I add a distinction I see there is not, earlier vehicle trips was mentioned, vehicular trips, and I think that it might be less about a point in time vehicular trips, but the trajectory that's possible. So something like a Christmas tree sales lot, you know, in the future, 50 years from now, you could walk up and get your Christmas tree. I did it in New York when I lived there. You walk up and get your tree and get only one you can carry. There will never be a point where you can walk into a car dealership and walk out with a car. You just can't do it. So the trajectory there is there's a limit. Like it will never be zero, even in like a utopia, whatever, because it's a vehicle. So it will have some interaction with the corridor, moving people, which is the primary function of, you know, our idea is to have a efficient way of moving people throughout the corridor. So I guess that's why I see the distinction. I'm sorry if I got wildly off topic, because it's, yeah.
This went later. Maybe I just like when we look at the right-of-way, if staff could provide comment for that, I feel comfortable like leaving it as is, especially like having that special exception, but it would be interesting to have that discussion at a future date with the right-of-way.
Yeah, it's fine. And plus, I do sense discomfort with that, so let's not do it. We don't have to do everything.
Yeah, right,
tonight.
at the table.
Right, at the table.
Okay, so we have a double amended motion. Any further discussion? We can move to a vote. Yeah? Questions? Staff? Yep.
I'm not 100%, did they vote on the second amendment to apply the 516(3)(c)?
Yes.
That was voted, okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Both amendments carry, so.
I think
So now you're at your amended.
Commissioner Dish was the only one that toggled. No, and then yes.
4-1,
Yeah.
then 5-0.
Right.
Yep.
Was there already a mover and a seconder for the
It was
overall motion as amended, or?
Should have been.
when we started.
Right, that's,
It was
okay.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt
Yeah.
and Commissioner
And
Dish.
seconded by Dish?
Yes.
Okay.
Now we do the motion as amended.
Yes. Okay.
On the motion as amended in this meeting, Commissioner Hammerschmidt,
Yes.
Commissioner Salve,
Yes.
Commissioner Dish,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner Weiss.
Yes.
That motion carries.
That motion fails.
It fails. It does.
All that work.
It looks like it carries. It does not.
Okay, so with that, let me toggle back, make sure. But I believe we are now back on to public comment. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about any issue that is not listed on the public hearing. Any issue. I'm going to strike this on my typo. Speak for 3 minutes on any issue. We will first call on individuals present to address the commission and then remote participants. To speak during this public hearing remotely, press *9 if listening by phone and use the raise hand feature if viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 with meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number or by name if available for those accessing through the web link. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Seeing no one in the room, we are going to move directly to remote callers. Ms. Kelly, do we have anyone on the line?
We have one hand raised at this time. Adam Goodman, you have permission to speak.
Hi there, Adam Goodman, 400 Virginia Avenue again. So I just wanted to reemphasize something that Commissioner Weich said, which was that City Council did not direct Planning Commission to delay applying TC1 to other corridors when they passed R22-390. Yes, you may have heard that sentiment expressed by certain people in the discussion, but a majority of them voted to strip out language from that resolution that would have contemplated such a delay. I believe it is urgent to move forward with TC1 on all of the proposed corridors, even if there are potentially some changes coming. And I further believe that the instruction you have received from council, such as it is, would not be inconsistent with such an approach. I also think specifically, if you look at Plymouth Road, for example, it does not have the same right-of-way constraints as West Stadium does. So that I definitely don't think that particular concern should be a reason to delay here. More broadly, I guess, I do understand on the other hand that it seems cleaner to solve the open questions first, but you're already seeing the downsides of this delay with just as one example, this UMCU project we talked about at the beginning of the meeting that nobody seems to like. So, okay, if y'all think differently, if you think it's best to delay rezoning, then I don't agree, but I believe you do have that prerogative. But absent explicit council resolution speaking to this, you are the ones who need to own that decision. It is not correct and it is not proper to say you are doing this because of direction you have received from council. Thank you.
Thank you. There is one additional hand raised. Alex Lowe, you have permission to address the commission.
Hi, Alex Lowe again, calling from Southeast East Ann Arbor. As Adam pointed out before me, we're starting to deal with issues related to the city's slow pace of rolling out TC1. And this is starting to cause some real friction between the city and businesses and community members. So let's get cracking. Let's do some more TC1ing. We can improve it even after we've rezoned Plymouth Road, after we've rezoned Washington, after we've rezoned Platt, after we've rezoned Packard, after we've rezoned Eisenhower. We can do all of those and still make improvements to TC1 after that. So let's use both hands. We can work on TC1 with one hand, or work on rolling it out with one hand, and work on improving with another. That's why we have multiple people here. That's why we've got multiple members of staff, etc. So let's go at that, and let's remember that TC1 is supposed to be different from what we're used to seeing in every little trashy little city in America, where you've got the 17 lane strode and no ability to walk anywhere. TC1 is supposed to be different than that. TC1 is supposed to be more like downtown. So let's not take that and say, oh well, we'll make it look a bit like downtown, but we're still going to let people have cars just everywhere. It's ridiculous. This is supposed to be different from that. This is supposed to be an example for the rest of America. Let's make it that. Thank you.
There are no more callers.
Thank you. So, next we're on to Commissioner Proposed Business. Commissioner Waitch.
Just a quick clarification for the sake of being accurate. I misremembered the motion that brought this to our table. It did happen with the new council, and I was focusing on the 6-5 vote that was deleted at the urging of Commissioner Iyer, who said there is a huge sense of urgency around TC1 rezoning in Ann Arbor. So I apologize for misstating it, and I just, before the end of the meeting, wanted to correct the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? And we move to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Clark. We are adjourned.
Oh, sorry. No, it's fine.